right, everyone, thank you for joining. Today is our USBC, US Blockchain Coalition Policy Unconference. I know a lot of folks will be joining us a little bit later, but we're going to kick off because this is recorded, and this recording will be made available to anyone that wants it later on. It's a great way for us to showcase all the great work that our states have been doing and also update each other on all the things that have happened this past year. In the meantime, I'm going to kick off with an overview of the USBC, and then we'll kick off into the rest of the agenda with the CHIPS Act and a little brief update on Washington before we head into Texas. All right, let me share my screen. Okay, so the agenda today, we're going to cover the CHIPS Act and a brief Washington state update. Then we'll go into Texas. Lee will be giving us an update on all the things that are happening in Texas with the working group. They're just about to submit their proposal and report. Also, all the things that are happening in mining in Texas. David Pope will present the legislative updates in Wyoming. They have a lot of new ideas, innovative ideas coming up. Jamie will come and give us an update on all things California, the EO status, and some recent wins they've had in California. And then we'll have North Carolina present with Agnes and Dan talking about the sandbox legislation. I know that was really popular amongst the states this year, past year, to share. And also the Crypto Innovation Council that's kicking off. And then Dennis Porter from the Satoshi Action Fund will be sharing some model policy proposals around Bitcoin mining. There aren't very many model policies around, and so Dennis has some really good ones around Bitcoin mining. And then we'll have open mic for any states that want to give updates on what's happening around in their particular states. But I want to kick off with this quote by Justice Brandeis. The United States are our laboratories of democracy. And I think as we've been hearing updates about what's going on in DC, and I know DC is a whole nother ball game, we may end up in a gridlock this coming year. After all the elections and such. So, you know, there really is a good opportunity for the states to take leadership role in helping the United States move forward, especially on the policy and regulatory front. We are partnered with the technology industry, and so this is how we're different. You know, blockchain, Bitcoin, crypto, all of this technology is technology. And so it really makes sense to partner with the largest technology industry association in the United States. Did you know some interesting facts? Siemens is the oldest technology company established in 1847. Most of the large software giant companies that we see today, like the Microsofts, were started back in the 1980s. And here we are today, an emerging technology association. Just a quick reminder, I think it's good to just refresh ourselves and also to share with others that don't know so much about the US Blockchain Coalition. We're here to envision and enable the day when we can live, work, play, learn, govern under a uniform regulatory and policy framework that empowers individuals, protects privacy and intellectual property, and serves the needs of our people, companies, and institutions. And here we are, as we are bringing all the states and different folks that are working together on the policy front, both federal and at the state level. We're the convener, proactive coordinator, and strategic unifier across the states in the country. We're a collection of stakeholders who believe people, communities, and economies flourish under the guidance and direction of a uniform regulatory and policy framework. And I think something that you'll see as we talk about some of our priorities coming up is that we're the Information, Insight, and Analytics Bureau for emerging technologies like blockchain to provide strategy, policy guidance, and model legislation across the country. We figured this out when the internet came out back in the day, when telecom went through its thing back in the day, and here we are recreating the wheel again with the blockchain technologies. And so, we think we can really set up the framework, and as new technologies evolve and come out, we'll have the framework set up and, new technologies to come out quicker and quicker, especially these days. So one of the reasons we're here today is to share these best practices and lessons learned, improve operational efficiency for each other so that we're sharing those best practices and helping others set up faster and quicker and more efficiently in each state. We're using the collective purchasing power for the benefit of each of our state members. And so, we're able to provide here in Washington, our members, easily more accessible and cheaper rates for 401ks and health benefits for our members. And so that's something that each state association can take advantage of as you get set up. We're here to consolidate political influence. And then we're also here to partner and convene and consolidate knowledge with national and global blockchain associations as we work on education and making blockchain, crypto, and Bitcoin a better part of our societal ecosystem. So some outcomes we're looking for, we want to make sure that we're advocating against anti-blockchain crypto policies at the state and federal level, which means we'll be reactive and we need to act quickly when those happen. We're creating this policy exchange process, which this policy unconference or roundtable is really a big part of. And so, not every state will be moving at the same pace. And so those states that are moving a little bit more quickly have the opportunity to help lead and influence other states, which I think is really great for all of us in this country. And then we want to highlight tech-savvy local and state electeds who are well-educated in this particular technology. And then on top of it, I think what will really, really help us in the impact front is propelling those business use cases in government that use distributed ledger technology and really work on those private-public partnerships, as we'll hear about today. I stole this slide from Lee Bratcher from Texas, but Hester Peirce had this great quote: "States make great policy experimentation incubators," and that's what we're here to do. Some topics we will touch upon or have touched upon in past roundtables: self-sovereign identity. I think California will be talking about this. Data protection, security, and privacy. Verifiable credentials and decentralized identifiers. Again, I think California is going to be talking about this. Economic development with safe harbor zones and sandboxes. This is the North Carolina has been leading this, especially recently. Building those public and private partnerships. This is a slide from our last policy unconference. And at that time in 2021, these were the different coalitions and initiatives and task force that were across the United States. And here we are today. Via the US Blockchain Coalition, we have many states that have engaged and are onboarding and or leading the coalition today. The states that are in blue are states where we are still looking for contacts. So if you know folks in Alaska, Delaware, Maine, Maryland, Missouri, Montana, or Nebraska, we're really looking for folks. The states that are in orange are heading up our steering committee and helping us bring this together. We're going to skip these slides. Another thing I want to highlight is that we are pushing for an economic impact study of digital assets. We have found some vendors, and so it's copying the study that the US Chamber of Commerce did back in the day, where they did a study on the economic impact of digital technologies on rural small businesses across the states. And it was a really cool website where you could select a state and see the stats for your particular state, and then you could see it all summarized for your particular region or across the United States. And so we're going to be doing something very similar, but across all digital assets and across all states. And if you want more information on the scope, happy to share it with you, but it's also here in the slide, which we will share with you afterwards too. We're looking for sponsors for this particular study. I think this will be really useful for each state. Whether you're at the policy level or you're an innovator or investor, I think this will be really useful for all of us. We're going to aim to have this done by March of 2023, assuming that the sponsorship dollars come in. Other updates to be on the lookout for, as I mentioned, we're going to be really looking for those use cases to propel in government that use distributed ledger technology. And so we're going to be building out the use case catalog and showcase. Starting now, I'll be reaching out to states for their top use cases, especially for those use cases that are not necessarily focused on crypto. We're looking for use cases that use and leverage distributed ledger technologies. And then we'll be building out those partnerships. Another note is we're working on a VIP event, multi-state VIP event on November 17th at the Texas Blockchain Summit. And so if you're attending, you should go. and look for our VIP event. If you're not going, reach out. There is a coupon code that Texas has very kindly and generously shared with us. So, definitely look at it as an opportunity. All right, well, that's it for my slides. I want to give you a quick update about the USBC and the US Blockchain Coalition and all that we're doing. First up, we're going to have Brittany Jarno from the WTIA. She's going to give us an overview of the CHIPS Act. Remember, the WTIA is one of our biggest sponsors for the Blockchain Coalition. It's the largest technology industry association, so they have a very unique perspective and influence that we're leveraging as we build out our coalition. And then she'll also give us a short update on Washington State since she's here. And then we'll go and hear from Texas. So about 20 minutes for Brittany, and then we'll do a Q&A, and then I'll introduce the next speaker. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so thanks again, Ari. As she said, my name is Brittany Jarno. I am our public policy manager at the Washington Technology Industry Association. And I am going to run through a very short presentation that does a brief overview on the Federal Chips and Science Act, and then provides a brief overview on what has happened in Washington State over the past year, and as it relates to blockchain policy. So on chips, generally, this has been a hotly debated piece of legislation. The US House and US Senate had their own versions of this bill. You may have seen it in the media as competition legislation. The US Innovation and Competition Act in the Senate focused primarily on chip and semiconductor subsidies, while the America Competes Act, which was voted on by the US House, included immigration and workforce development provisions. The final legislation, which passed this summer, despite its name, includes significant funding and program opportunities beyond chip and semiconductor subsidies. So as it relates to blockchain, the first item is the regional technology and innovation hubs, which are being developed by the US Department of Commerce and will create 20 regional technology hubs across the US that focus on technology development, job creation, and expanding the US innovation economy. Then several of the federal agencies receive significant funding to either create or bolster their R&D efforts, including the National Science Foundation to create a Directorate of Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships to accelerate domestic development of national and economic security critical technologies, of which blockchain is specifically listed. The Department of Energy, through its National Laboratories System, advancing energy and industrial efficiency technologies. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, or you'll probably hear it as NIST, conducting research and standards development in industries of the future. And it's really important that the White House's Office of Science and Technology Policy will have a blockchain and cryptocurrency specialist, because that ends up moving forward the presidential administration's policy priorities on various pieces of legislation and policy. And so having someone focused on blockchain is really exciting in that office. So in terms of opportunities from this legislation, because there are so many federal agencies involved, there will inevitably be increased engagement with those agencies and opportunities to weigh in through requests for information or requests for comment. The regional tech hubs are really exciting and will be an opportunity to advance technology companies and technology innovation across the states where a hub is created, including innovative technologies like blockchain. And then across the federal government, there is a focus on STEM education across the CHIPS Act. And so more students involved in computer science and other technology training is also, a general win for our industry. Moving on to Washington State. So brief overview of WTIA. We're a consortium that includes a not-for-profit member trade association, a not-for-profit tech apprenticeship intermediary, and a for-profit corporation delivering business services. Our mission is to foster a robust, equity-centered technology sector that empowers thriving communities. We have several different blockchain initiatives. I won't go too far into most of these because I'm going to focus on policy, but there are folks on the line who can answer any specific questions about other work through these initiatives. But we have the Cascadia Blockchain Council, which is our regional blockchain council for British Columbia, Washington State, and Oregon. Our Advanced Technology Cluster, which is part of a program funded by our Washington State Department of Commerce that works to accelerate innovative technologies across different sectors. And then obviously we're here today as part of the US Blockchain Coalition. So in 2022, we definitely had some successes, but there were a couple frustrating moments as well. We were successful in establishing a Washington blockchain work group, like many of your states have previously. We are really excited about using this model in Washington State to come up with recommendations for how our state can support growth of the sector while doing it in a responsible manner. And throughout our state legislative session, we also were able to increase our legislator education impact and state agency interest, again, referencing our Advanced Technology Cluster, which is a state-funded initiative, which is very exciting. And then we were also able to identify additional policymaker champions who were interested and supportive of innovative technologies. One primary frustration we had was during the legislative process on the verifiable credentials bill. We ended up having some interest groups who had concerns about the bill come in at the very, very last minute of the legislative session. And so that really just demonstrated how we need to do a better job of speaking to any and all potentially interested groups to ensure that they understand what the bill itself does and what this technology actually is. So looking ahead here in Washington State, in just about a month, we will be hosting a town hall with the Department of Financial Institutions. They have been a really great state agency partner with us to understand some of the licensing and regulatory nuances here in Washington State. And so this will be our third year doing a town hall with them, which is really exciting. Our legislative session starts the second week of January 2023. And as the Washington and Cascadia Blockchain Council will be doing a blockchain day on the hill sort of lobbying and discussion with our champions, as well as some education to folks that we think could be good partners. And then, like I said, our blockchain work group, the recommendations are due in December of 2023, and we look forward to what that will look like and how we can leverage those recommendations in the 2024 legislative session and beyond. So that wraps it up for me. This is my contact information. I will send all of this to Ari as well so she can send this around. I see there are questions, so I'm going to stop the share and be able to address those. So give me a second. Cool. So that is my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
And feel free to put it into the chat, or there's a Q&A section at the bottom of the window if you have questions or comments that you'd like to add. But it sounds like the CHIPS Act with the regional tech hubs, there's a lot of good opportunities that we should look into and take advantage of as we coordinate North Carolina has his hand up. Dan Taylor.
Thanks, Ari. I had a question about the opposition that you ran into when you were working on at the state level, at the state legislature. We ran into some similar opposition at the 11th hour, and we were able to thankfully get in there and negotiate a little bit on the sandbox bill. It was the insurance industry and the legal industry actually came out against some provisions. But can you talk a little bit about the opposition and how you handled it or mitigated it?
Sure, that's an excellent question. So we ended up hearing from several consumer rights groups who had concerns about what verifiable credentials, didn't have a fundamental understanding what verifiable credentials actually are. Additionally, our bill was really just asking the applicable state agency to start a process to think of a framework, a trust framework. And the folks who did weigh in at the last minute had, thought we were going to be creating a state ID, and just didn't really understand what the bill actually did. Another piece of our bill called on several state agencies to do some review of what of their credential programs could be a good opportunity for a verifiable credential. And that ended up creating a rather relatively large fiscal note, which was another complicating factor. Our bill didn't pass, so it will be something that we hope will come out in the recommendations of our work group, so that we have some buy-in from those stakeholders who had the concerns. They're on our work group, and so we'll have the opportunity to interface with them more directly and talk through these concerns, not in front of the legislative committee, and get things moving hopefully a little more constructively.
Yeah, and we actually had really good success with a lot of support from the legislative side, like the House and the senators were really excited about the potential to just work on setting this up and starting to think about it. But yeah, as Michael Schuster comments in the chat, the ACLU was the one in particular that showed up very last minute at the 11:59th hour and torpedoed it with it was anti-privacy and anti-human rights, and we were just really surprised. So yeah, we do still have a lot of educating to do, despite the support that we had from the legislators. There's still some fear.
Yeah, the bill passed our Senate unanimously, and then fell over the final hurdle in the House. So we think there's a lot of opportunity here. Folks like the ACLU will be part of our work group, and so we'll have a chance to, sit down and figure out how we can, come up with something better that everyone understands.
Yes, and January Walker writes, there shouldn't be fear with self-sovereign identity. And so, maybe states that have had success with it, I think California might be one of them, and other folks, the more notes we can share across states around this, that definitely is very helpful. Thank you, January. And when you guys comment, you can comment to everybody in both the panelists and host and attendees, or you can comment only to those that are panelists. So you can select that when you write in the chat box. There's a drop down that says everyone or host and panelists. So just want to point that out in case you want to share with everybody. Any other questions or comments for Brittany? All right, well, let us know if you want to get in touch. You'll have her information. Oh, yeah. So when you type in your message into the chat, there's a little blue box that's selected with a tiny little upside down triangle that says host and panelists. You have to click the tiny little triangle in the chat box where you type. You'll see it. If you click the tiny little triangle, there's a drop down and you can select everyone. Right, hopefully you can find it.
Ari, I don't think there is one for those of us in the panel webinar.
Oh, really? You can't chat to everybody?
We can chat but their choice is hosts and panelists, and then individually the panelists. There is no everyone option.
Oh, I'm the only one that has oh no, there's someone that has everyone. Amelia, Lindy, Dan. Hi everyone. See?
Yeah.
You have to, if you scroll a little bit, there should be an everyone.
I think the panelists can't see the everyone, but other people, attendees can see the everyone. It's all good. We'll just send it to you, Ari, and you can blast it out to everybody.
Okay, I'll blast it out. No problem. Happy to do it. All right, well, everyone has everyone. So hi, everyone. Hi, Michael, Brigitta, Barry, Jim, Dan, Amelia, and everyone. Oh, from Hawaii. Great. All right. Well, I think we're a little ahead of schedule. Lee, since you're on, do you want to hop on and do your portion for Texas? And maybe that'll give us more time for Q&A if there's more questions on Q&A.
Happy to. Let me share my screen.
Hi, Lee.
Good morning. I guess a good afternoon, depending on the time zone. Can you see the screen okay?
Can see the screen.
All right. So sharing on a couple of fronts here. One is the recommendations from the Texas Blockchain Work Group. These are not published yet, so they're not final, which is why I don't have exact language. I just have ideas and sort of this theoretical direction that the work group is going on a variety of different topics, from commercial contracts to DAOs, energy, finance, government, record keeping, et cetera. And then at the end of the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about the TBC, about Bitcoin mining in Texas, and a couple things that we've tried to specialize in. So the Texas Blockchain Work Group was appointed after a piece of legislation passed the last session in Texas. The governor, lieutenant governor, and the speaker of the House all appointed a few members, some from industry, some from higher education, and some from 2 members of the legislature. And so we've been meeting for the last 12 months or so to come up with a report. It's very lengthy, but I'm going to summarize some of the recommendations here that I think will make it into the final report. Again, this is not official. This is sort of just the thoughts of Lee Bratcher, one of the members, not the official thoughts of the work group itself. I do think Texas will adopt the new Uniform Commercial Code that the Uniform Law Commission worked on. It is in line with what we adopted last session with our amendments to Chapter 12 of the UCC. This is simply just the definitions around digital assets, virtual currencies, definitions around control and perfecting security interests in those general intangibles. So there's been some states that it's sort of up in the air about whether or not all 50 states will adopt the ULC's UCC recommendations. I think the ULC has come a long way. They initially were a little bit antagonistic or apprehensive to some of the innovations that states like Wyoming and Texas and others were pushing forward on the UCC changes. But they've changed their tune a little bit. They've been working with us, with Wyoming, with CoinDesk in DC. And so I think we've met in the middle in a good way on that. We do hope to have DAO legislation in Texas. Of course, the work group will recommend that we're incentivizing, companies whose technology and whose revenue model does not depend on the monetization of personal data. And then, of course, clarifying that businesses can incorporate, we say a full range of business entity formation options, but in all likelihood, that will be curtailed to a couple different options, right? It's probably not going to be possible to do like a S corporation DAO in Texas, just too many complications there. So likely it'll focus on LLCs and maybe regular corporations, but so that is certainly one of the recommendations for the work group. On the energy side, mostly pertains to proof of work mining. So we will make recommendations around grid stability and having miners that are large flexible loads and utilize demand response in a certain way, have this big red off button that the state's grid operator can turn these big miners off whenever the grid gets into trouble. We already know the miners are going to be off anyways by then because of their economic incentives to not be mining when power is expensive. So anytime the grid's in trouble, power is high. And so we don't expect this to affect the miners too much, but it'll give more comfort to the legislature and to ERCOT, the Texas grid operator. We also do plan on passing legislation around methane and flare gas reduction, such that if a on-site consumer of that energy, whether it be a Bitcoin miner or an other high-performance compute data center, sets up on-site at a well that is formerly flaring gas, if that gas gets redirected to the high-performance compute data center or the Bitcoin mine or whatever on-site consumer is there, then you wouldn't have to pay severance tax on that. So it's still working its way through the Railroad Commission and a couple others. So that's on the docket. On the finance side, we're considering legislation that would allow the state to invest in different cryptocurrencies that have a large market cap, such as Bitcoin and Ethereum. This will probably take the form of an amendment to the Public Funds Investment Act that allows for like municipal governments to make a little bit more unique investments in alternative investments. And then one of the interesting things that came out of our discussions was the way that Texas defines money. Crypto is not included, but dollar-backed stablecoins are included. But we have to clarify that dollar-backed stablecoins are included in the definition of money particularly for the Texas Money Services Act. So that is a recommendation that I think will make it into the final report. Again, cannot guarantee it, but some nuance there in the definitions between stablecoins and crypto and virtual currencies in general. And lastly, some recommendations around like practical blockchain DLT use cases in the government and for record keeping. So we will recommend that there'll be established a decision model, a decision tree or matrix where agencies can understand if DLT is an appropriate technology for a process or whatever they're trying to improve in their agency. Because if we just say, hey, use blockchain, it'll oftentimes be a square peg in a round hole. As we all know very well, blockchain does some things very well and other things terribly. So we don't want government agencies to getting bad taste in their mouth for trying to apply blockchain or DLT to a circumstance where it is not best suited. We will recommend the piloting of maybe a couple counties pilot land registries on blockchain, and then also that the Texas Secretary of State potentially pilots a UCC1 financing statements on blockchain to completely eliminate paper filings. So not only are we eliminate paper filings, of course, you could do this digitally without blockchain. You could do it just through standard digitization of that process. But with the blockchain application here, we're considering hashing those financing statements so that the immutability of it can be ascertained, and so that you can retain some privacy in certain aspects of the UCC1, but still have the kinds of things that need to be public facing about a UCC1, have that be available to the public if they need to see it. Of course, if you are filing or if you do take possession of crypto as collateral, you do not need to file a UCC1 in Texas and probably several other states by now, because you can perfect your security interest in that collateral for crypto or virtual currencies only through possession of the cryptographic keys, right? I guess David or some of the other accountants and attorneys on the line could probably correct me. There's other things that you can perfect your security interest in without having or just through possession, like physical assets. But with crypto, since it's not a physical asset, you can perfect your security interest through possession of the cryptographic key. So that's an important point to make. Bitcoin mining in Texas, we see an expansion of the number of companies. We're up to between 1,500 and 2,000 megawatts Bitcoin mining in Texas. To put that in context, the entire Texas grid on a hot day is 80,000 megawatts. On a cool day is about 40 to 50,000 megawatts, like on a fall day, like today in October in Texas. So, you know, between 1% and 2% of the Texas grid, Bitcoin mining, 2,000 megawatts is larger than the power grids or power consumed by some small states. So it is a lot of energy, and that's why we've been working really closely with ERCOT on the energization of these sites. There was an article in Bloomberg recently about 30,000 megawatts of Bitcoin mining coming to Texas. That is not true. It's simply, they were quoting the interconnection queue. So there have been 30,000 megawatts of application for interconnection on the Texas grid for large flexible loads like Bitcoin miners. But that is mostly people just throwing mud against the wall and seeing what sticks, and miners that are applying for multiple sites. They may only be planning to build a 100 megawatt mine, but they apply for 5 different locations to see which one gets approved first. And therefore you get what may look like 500 megawatts for that, what would only be 100 megawatts. So we expect, the global Bitcoin mining network is between 13,000 and 25,000 megawatts. So we'll probably only have about 5,000 of that in Texas. And by the time we get to 5,000 megawatts, the global Bitcoin mining network will probably be built out to 30,000. So we don't foresee Texas really breaching maybe like 20% of the global hash rate, but we do think that Texas is a great place for this. Okay. At this time, I'm going to stop sharing and open it up for a couple questions. And if there are none, hand it back over to Ari.
Oh, there's got to be questions because people are always asking about what's going on in Texas. So yeah, you can use the chat function to list your question. There's also a Q&A function in your Zoom window at the bottom, or just feel free to message me however way you want, and I will make sure we get your question asked and answered today. But I could kind of kick
while those
off.
Questions are coming in, do I have 2 more minutes? Are we still ahead of schedule?
We're still way ahead of schedule. So yeah, go for it.
One of the things that Ari asked me to share about is some of the things that Texas is doing on the industry association front.
Yeah.
Some states have industry associations, some states have working groups, some states have both. It just really depends on the state. So on the industry association front, Texas is trying to operate like many of you guys, and like Cascadia and North Carolina and many of y'all, as that chamber of commerce that does the policy piece and does the business development piece. So as far as we're up to over 100 corporate members now in the TBC, and part of that, of course, was really challenging at first. Our first year, I think we had 7 corporate members. So it's been a long process for the last couple of years, but part of that journey has been me understanding and all, the rest of our team understanding, and I think Jim Flint from our team is on the line as well, understanding the dynamics of different companies. And what we found is companies with high regulatory risk don't really care about the business development side. And a lot of companies without the regulatory risk only care about the business development side. So let me parse that out a little bit more. Like a Bitcoin miner or a DeFi protocol, or somebody that is really innovating, they mostly want our help for the policy and lobbying piece. education, policy, lobbying, et cetera. There's probably a lot of other things that you guys can add to that list. And so we sort of stopped pitching them on the business development front. But on the other side of the coin, you've got like your accounting firms, law firms, ancillary services firms, like private equity groups. They all are interested in the space for a host of different reasons. They care a little bit less about policy and a lot more about marketing, business development, branding, finding their next client, all that stuff. So that was a painful lesson for us to learn a couple of years ago, and we're still learning it, I'm sure. Like even today, we had a member call, and there was a couple things that came up that I realized, like, hey, we're still learning that lesson that, you know, depends on the audience really tailors the message. And not that the message changes, but that, you know, some groups care a lot more about certain parts of the message than the other part. So those are just a couple of thoughts, you know, as Ari was asking me to share a few things about what we're doing that came to mind. So
Yeah, super helpful. It's been really amazing to watch Texas Blockchain Council grow, especially over the last couple of years. That's why I reached out originally back in May of 2021, just so impressed with your work. We do have two questions. So Barry asks, are you looking at any custody legislation?
Not really, because the Texas Department of Banking issued guidance to our Texas banks that banks can custody, and already money services businesses in Texas do not custody. So we're kind of, you know, if you're a regulated exchange, or if you're other kinds of entities, you can custody. If you're a bank, you can custody. Some of these money services businesses don't want to custody, but if they do, they can go into some of those other avenues. The thing that we are looking at is some consumer protection legislation around commingling of custody funds, which Barry, maybe that's part of your question that you were getting at, is like the Celsiuses of the world and the BlockFis of the world. So there's been some legislators that have asked us to research what it would look like for a state to pass legislation that would require pretty significant disclosures if your funds are being commingled by an exchange. Not like in the fine print type disclosure, but like, you know, huge text on the app or on the desktop. You know, you have to check here and understand that you've read those two sentences that say, hey, your funds are being commingled on the back end with other customer funds. So that's one of the thoughts on custody.
Follow-up question from Barry on that was around trust companies. Maybe same question on trust companies.
Oh, so yeah, we are not pursuing the special purpose depository institution like Wyoming has. Not because we don't, I mean, I think it's valuable. We do think it's valuable. It's just a heavy lift in Texas. And we foresee like significant opposition from the banking sector. So, and as far as trust companies go, I'm not aware, Barry, you'll have to educate me a little bit on this. States, there's a lot of trust companies that operate nationally under like a national charter. I'm not sure what we can do, but there's probably some things that we can do to affect that.
Well, I think only 3 trust companies actually have the national trust charter. I think
that's true. Yeah.
Axos and maybe
Protego,
yep, and Anchorage. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe Anchorage. I think it's Anchorage.
That sounds right. Yeah, I could be missing the boat. So Barry, if you have some model trust company legislation that we need to be looking at, feel free to send it my way.
I think Barry in South Dakota, they have a lot of trust companies, a lot of trust company activities there. So should definitely trade notes potentially.
Awesome.
Cool. And then the other question from Raphael from Minnesota. He asks, what are you most excited about in the next 12 months?
The Texas Blockchain Summit.
That's coming up right here, right? What are the dates?
It's November 17th and 18th. So we're about a month and a half away. A lot of the momentum for us in the legislative session gets set at the summit, right? It's right before the session starts in January. we're having a lot of legislators and policymakers that will come out to the summit. So if they see a big audience of very animated and excited Texans and people from all over the country who are kind of descending on Texas for that summit, they'll get more excited about our policy agenda. So we look at the summit not only as an opportunity to get all of us together and talk shop and, you know, kiss babies and shake hands and do all that stuff, but also as an opportunity to demonstrate the grassroots excitement that we have to our policymakers. There was an awesome video. I don't know if it was Ari or somebody in this group posted it about a news segment that talked about the crypto swing voter. It was on CNBC or something. It was a very reputable, like, national publication. And they did a full news segment about saying, like, there are more crypto voters in this next election than there are union voters. Like, crypto voters are a stronger voter demographic than like union members in the US.
Really interesting.
They were specifically talking about swing states, I think, but I thought that was really cool that they did that.
We'll have to look that up and share it amongst us. I'll do a Google search, or Lee, if you find it.
I'll look for it. And one thing, Ari, I don't know if you can blast that out to the panelists and the attendees, but
Yeah.
last thing on the mining front, and this is really broader, talking about Ari's initiative to do the economic development study. We had a really positive story written recently by the Texas Tribune, which is kind of you probably wouldn't know it if you're not in Texas, but a lot of lawmakers read it. It's sort of a policy publication newspaper. And they talked all about job creation, tax revenue, and all these different things. So it really doesn't matter if it's mining or if it's, you know, devs or if it's layer ones, whatever the job is or whatever the industry or whatever the vertical, us being able to tout those job creation numbers and that tax revenue is critical. So.
Hence, yeah, if you know of any sponsors or any folks that would be interested in sponsoring our economic impact study for digital assets, I think this will be really, really big, not just for us, but for everyone involved in this space.
Couldn't agree more.
Jamie just sent and shared a link, so I'm just going to share it with everyone. Other questions or comments for Lee Bratcher, president of the Texas Blockchain Council and co-chair for the US Blockchain Coalition? Any other questions? How about on the DAO? Are you going to be looking to Wyoming or Tennessee? I think Tennessee just recently passed DAO legislation too, being number 2 state to do that. Where are you going to be getting your, I guess, inspiration?
Yeah, probably from a hodgepodge. Certainly, we've looked a lot at Wyoming's work. Carla Reyes, Professor Reyes, who is a law professor at SMU, is an advisor to the Wyoming DAO group. David may correct me on my terminology there. She is Vermont has DAO legislation. Yeah, so Texas certainly won't be first on DAO. We'll be, looks like 4th or 5th or 6th, maybe. Who knows? We may not even get it passed. But what we do know is, or what I know is, DAO legislation is not my area of expertise. So I will not attempt to elucidate any details on this. Although one thing I will say is we are trying to make it so you can have a registered agent. Your members are anonymous for public filing purposes, but you be made visible and KYC'd by a court through some sort of robust or beefed up registered agent process. So that's the sticking point, I know. But other than that, it'll be pretty standard, just trying to make sure that DAOs can have a bank account, that their members can remain anonymous, that operating agreements written in smart contracts are viable operating agreements, things like that. But again, we've got a couple people on our side of the policy committee that are working on this, both volunteers and lobbyists. So unfortunately, it's not an area that I'm super technical on.
No problem. Last call for questions for Lee Bretcher of Texas. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next part in the agenda because I think David is online from Wyoming. Going once, going twice. And you can always ping him. He's very responsive on Slack and Twitter and email. So just let me know if you want to get in contact with him. All right. Well, thank you, Lee, for your time and your presentation on all things Texas. All right. Well, next up, we have the amazing David Pope from Wyoming. They just had the Wyoming Blockchain Stampede. Was it last week or the week before? All the weeks are kind of running in together, but very recently, David Pope hosted the FinCon Day portion of the Wyoming Blockchain Stampede. So that was really exciting to be a part of that. David, do you want to come on and let me know how you want to get situated here?
Hi, Ari. Thanks for that, and thanks for giving the presentation at the FinCon portion. It was a marvelous presentation, and I certainly appreciate it. That was a fun day. We had Hester Peirce that did a fireside chat sort of arrangement. We had Chris Land from Senator Lummis's office, and we had Senator Lummis herself that gave a recorded presentation. But it was a wonderful day, and we had a lot of fun there. I wish you could have actually been, but maybe next year. So anyway, all right. What I'd like to do is just give a brief history of the bills that have been passed in Wyoming, talk in depth about a couple of things that are coming up, and go from there and answer questions, especially about our DAO legislation. And I've got a number of personal feelings about that, but also kind of some of the struggles that Wyoming is experiencing as we trailblaze in this area, in kind of that process that the legislature is going through. First off, a brief history of blockchain in Wyoming. In 2015, with the first initiative was created in Wyoming. It was Tyler Lindholm who sponsored the first legislation, which was just an amendment to our Money Transmitters Act to exempt cryptocurrencies from that act. And as he will say, he puts it in a little more colorful Wyoming language, but he was soundly defeated in the legislature because there was just no knowledge of blockchain or cryptocurrency. The famous story is that that Senator Lummis, now Senator Lummis, who was Representative Lummis back then, went to a cryptocurrency conference in Florida, opened an account with Coinbase, and by the time she arrived back in Wyoming, that account was closed because of our money transmitter laws. So Tyler took up the banner and presented a bill to the legislature, and I'm not sure he got a single vote that time. In 2017, along with Caitlin Long and Rob Jennings, we created the Wyoming Blockchain Coalition, and we went about it a little bit differently. Before we went to the legislature, we developed a coalition made up of the university professors, an ex-president of the University of Wyoming, a number of legislators, including Tyler Lindholm, and business leaders from around the state. My job with that was to educate the legislature on what blockchain was, which was great because I had only recently sat down and had my epiphany about blockchain. But that year, or the following year in our legislative session, we had 5 bills that we presented. One that amended the Money Transmitters Act. We allowed electronic records via blockchain for our counties, our county record system, and we also exempted digital assets from property tax. But the biggest bill was the first legislatively defined, or the legislative definition of a utility token. That was the first in the world, and it exempted actual utility tokens from our securities laws. Then in 2019, we went back with a number of bills, which, as far as quantity, that 2019 was the biggest year for us. We created a fintech sandbox. We created the Wyoming Utility Token Act, which took our previous year's definition and moved utility tokens from securities law into property law. We created a commercial filing system that was interesting, in which we were trying to push the Secretary of State into basically creating a blockchain-based API into the Secretary of State systems for any commercial filings. We have so far been unsuccessful in getting the Secretary of State to do that, but they say it's coming. And then also the biggest one that year was we created a special purpose depository institution that Lee referenced earlier on. The first 4 of those are still trying to get their Fed accounts, but it is Caitlin Long's bank has sued the Fed at this point to try and force them to give her an account. And that there have been hints that that will be resolved quickly. Whether it becomes a moot point because they actually give her the account, or whether it's legally with the Fed just coming to an agreement with them. Now, whether quickly means in geologic time or regular time for us mere mortals, I don't know, but it is now in the motion, and hopefully it's resolved soon. They do have a workaround, with correspondent banking relationships, but that's something that they would prefer not to do. We allowed corporate stock certificates to be issued on a blockchain and tokenized. We made some more amendments that year to the digital assets definitions, and we created the ability for our electric utilities to actively negotiate with mining companies, basically with cutoff switches and other items that Lee was talking about, that gave our legislature comfort. 2020, we applied a number of rights to digital expressions. We basically said code is a form of free speech unless it harms someone. Did a few other amendments, nothing really huge. We gave municipal bonds the ability to, or cities issuing municipal bonds, the ability to tokenize those bonds. Not really anything huge in beyond that. In 2021, that's when we passed the Dow legislation. Again, that was that was a bit of a heavy lift. because of all of the definitional issues, and we are still dealing with those. It's an active, ongoing discussion within the legislature. Then in 2022, this past session, we continued that was a budget session, so only really one thing of note happened, and that was we continued to redefine items in our original Dow bill, which brings us up to 2023. Interesting stuff happening. Again, we're still struggling with the Dow legislation. Wyoming in 2022, this year, during the session, we did pass a stable token, create a Wyoming stable token. That was vetoed by the governor because he didn't believe technologically our treasurer's office would be able to handle that. So we gave specific instructions to the legislature on how to change that bill, and with that, a subtle form of assurance that should it pass again, and should the treasurer's office take direction from him, he would sign the bill at the end of the 2023 session. That I find an interesting bill because it would be a Wyoming-sponsored stable token that would be backed in real time by currency, by U.S. dollars, and the treasurer's office would basically make money off of the float, adding a little bit to the Wyoming Treasury. One interesting thing that came out of the select committee's discussions 2 weeks ago, just before the stampede, was that they started initial discussions about creating a Wyoming petrodollar that would be backed by Wyoming's natural resource holdings. And I call it a petrodollar because that's the kind of the nearest thing to it, but it would be a token that is fully backed by by Wyoming and our rich natural resources. So that was an interesting discussion. We are again trying to look at private cryptographic keys. 2 sessions ago, we floated a bill to the legislature that would prevent the requirement to disclose private cryptographic keys in any legal action. Basically, because if you disclose those keys, nobody owns it anymore, because anybody can access those through court documents, and you might as well just give the assets away, which is one of the issues that the legislature found with our UCC legislation, and why we are basically allowing traditional forms of UCC as opposed to possession and other forms of control as well. But that's an interesting one, and that will be proposed this year. Then another interesting one is the Wyoming Digital Asset Registration Act, which will allow the Secretary of State to certify and confirm ownership of digital assets that are registered with them. And it's being modeled along our trademark laws. And the second part of that discussion is that registered agents, which it would require a new form of registered agent, will be the ones that, or could be the ones that are responsible for tracking ownership of those registered digital assets. I view that as the foundation for creating a token entity, a registered token entity, and giving personhood to tokens, which I think is one of the next frontiers on the entity structure and the ability to trade physical assets electronically. So our structure here in Wyoming is that and first there was the blockchain task force that I participated on, the legislative blockchain task force, which was created in 2018. I served a year on that. That morphed into the Select Committee on Blockchain and Innovation, which I am not a part of, but that is a legislatively defined body, and their next meeting is in November. Okay, so that's a lot to go through. I have provided Ari with notes on all of these, and I'm happy to discuss.
Yes, wow. A lot of updates, and thank you for the background and history, David. And the notes that you provide, I'll put it into the shared states folders. So if states you want access to it, just let me know, and I'll make sure you point you to the folder, but there's a shared folder for all the different states. There is a question. Jeff Gow says, why Wyoming? Why? What do you mean, why Wyoming?
Okay, so why did Wyoming do this, or why is Wyoming the state that did all of this? Wyoming has a relatively small legislature, and we only meet for, let's see, in non-budget years we're allowed to meet 40 days, and in budget years we're allowed to meet 20 days, or maybe it's reverse from that. I can never keep it straight, but either way, at the beginning of each year they have a maximum of like a month or a month and a half to get stuff done. They define everything and collate everything during committee meetings throughout the summer each year, and it's relatively easy to access those meetings and those legislators, which is what I did I began in 2017. Once we formed the coalition, I began hosting meetups and training for legislators on blockchain. It was interesting. So that's one thing. A relatively small legislature with ease of access, I guess, is the best way to put it. The second thing about Wyoming is we are I struggle to define it, but almost more of a libertarian state. Everyone would have, the world would believe that we are fully red Republican, which to a certain extent we are, but I think it's more libertarian based. And what the legislators could see were two things. Number one, the potential for economic activity here to increase, and number two, the ability to provide more freedom over the assets that we own through digital assets and through blockchain. So you've got those two things that kind of met in the legislature, along with some very well-respected voices in the ex-president of the university. His name is Dick McGinnity. he was someone that the legislature respected to an extraordinary amount, and he was able to help teach. So that's in summary. We created a very broad coalition as well, like I said, with business, academia, and the legislators, economic development groups, all came together for this. And so now it's almost standard practice in Wyoming to include blockchain initiatives within the legislative session.
Great question, Jeff, and thank you for the background and history, David. Other questions from the group? Barry, South Dakota says, how did you work with banking?
That was probably the most adversarial bill that we passed. Oh, by the way, when you're looking at the history of these bills that passed, every one of them had a maximum of, I think the biggest, the largest amount of no votes was 5 in one of the bills. A tremendous number of them have passed unanimously, and there's just been very little eventual resistance to them. So that goes to the ability of the representatives and senators on our side to twist the arms of the others. But banking was one of those that was tough. They tell me it's a coincidence, but very soon after the Speedy Bank legislation was passed, the representative of the Wyoming Bankers Association was replaced. And it was contentious, and yet the legislature could see that there were broad reasons for having a special purpose depository institution. They not only saw that it helped in the cryptocurrency area, but I'm not sure if anybody's aware of the history of what was it called? Operation, I can't think of it now, but Operation Choke Point with the Justice Department in 2013 that went after a lot of industries that are near and dear to Wyoming. Were caught up in that, where the banks had their arms twisted to close accounts in industries that were not politically in favor. One of those being the firearms industry, near and dear to Wyoming. In case anybody was wondering, there are more firearms in Wyoming than there are people. Another one was the natural resources industry. Again, Wyoming's entire livelihood is wrapped around natural resources. And so the Speedy banks not only could be formed around cryptocurrency, but they are allowed to be formed around any industry that is unbanked or unbankable, that is legal within the state of Wyoming. So that's what the legislature saw. Right now, we have only crypto-oriented banks that have been started, but there is one Speedy Bank that has received its charter that is real estate oriented. It's an interesting thing. It is something I fought very hard for and helped create. So it's probably, for me, the crowning achievement of my involvement.
Wow, really interesting. Hopefully that answered your question, Barry. Barry says thanks. South Dakota. Katie Jackson of Hawaii, she says, if you were to go back knowing what you know now, what would you change or keep when it comes to creating a task force or select committee?
I don't know that I'd change anything around creating a task force or a select committee. I think the legislature the task force morphed into the select committee because the legislature had to grapple with how much power they wanted to give to this this side group. The task force had very little power because it was just a task force, and it could only and it actually fed into energy, natural resources, and economic development, and corporations. So those are two separate committees, full committees within Wyoming. So it could only recommend legislation to those committees. After 2 years of that, of having a task force, the legislature felt that it was important to give the task force the ability to actually create and bring to the floor legislation. And that's why they created a select committee, because that endowed them with the power to do that. As far as other things, what would I have changed anything at all about the process? I probably would have gone after the Dow entity earlier on, at least a couple of years earlier, so we could have had more time to flesh it out before it actually came to a vote the first time, because again, they're still struggling with parts of it, and I think it could have used a little more a little more help and a little more lead time.
So that's a good note for states that want to do Dow legislation. You're going to have to do a lot of educating and relationship building.
Yeah.
Potentially. Next question, Jeff Gauss, Oregon, says, what is the vision function of the real estate speedy bank in Wyoming?
You know, Jeff, I honestly don't know. I've met the CEO of the bank once, and they are holding their, I guess, their goals pretty close to the vest right now. But I mean, they've received their charter, which means that the banking commission believes they have a viable business plan, most of which is not public during that process for obvious reasons. But it is it's an interesting bank. I know Wyoming is also considering legislation this year on creating land banks in Wyoming. And that is something I know Wyoming doesn't have, but a lot of other states do. But so I'm not sure it may be tied to that, but they're interesting folks.
Interesting.
Commercium
Bank.
Commercium, COMMERCIUM, I think.
Commercium Bank.
Certainly.
Yes, thank you. I have a side question. So you said coming up, the digital assets regulations will be updated to allow the Secretary of State to certify, confirm assets that are registered using sort of like the trademark framework.
Yes.
And this would give ownership and be the basis for giving personhood to tokens. Why is that important to give tokens personhood? Why would you do that?
That's the creation of that's something I have been working on for 3 years now. I've testified and written short white papers around the idea of giving personhood to tokens. Right now, there is no way other than via contract to tie a physical asset to a token. So when you are trading a token that is tied via contract to a digital to a physical asset, it degrades the value of the asset in that you are looking at you are buying it through a third party that actually owns the asset and then trades an interest in that asset, a contractually based interest in that asset. If a token has personhood, then it's allowed to be on title. And so when you trade that asset electronically, you are trading title to that asset as opposed to an interest in title.
Oh, it's like a nuance, tiny little detail.
Right. Exactly. And I have met resistance to that, mainly because some of the members of the select committee feel that that will lead to assets in Wyoming that have basically that are traded via hedge funds and other mechanisms, and it will take them out of the hands of people within Wyoming.
Oh,
My counter to that argument is that it will actually drive down the entry point to investing in real estate for and drive away barriers to entry for investing in real estate for everyday people, people that may not be able to afford $1 million real estate investment, can afford a $1,000 real estate investment that is shared amongst a whole bunch of people.
cool. Very interesting.
Also think of the impact on home ownership. Instead of borrowing money from the bank, you could conceivably sell tokens to your house and then over time acquire those tokens incrementally.
Mhm.
You're not, which again creates resistance from banks and title companies. So this is a heavy lift, but it's one that I feel is really important for our industry.
Interesting. Cool. Thank you for sharing. Any other last questions for David of Wyoming? All right. Well, if you need to get in touch with David or need to find him, let me know. I think most of the states do have David's contact information. Jeff says, thank you, David in Wyoming, for your leadership.
Well, thank you to this group, and thank you specifically, Ari, for your organizational efforts here. We could not do it without you.
Thank you for everyone who are members and to all of our sponsors and supporters. So, this is a team effort, right? Together we rise. All right. Well, it looks like David's up. Not David's up. David's concluding now. And next up, we'll have Jamie, since she's online right now, from California. So Jamie Miner, I'll let you, maybe you can introduce yourself because not everyone has met with you before. And so maybe a quick background on yourself and then give the California update. Welcome, Jamie.
Yeah, hi, Erin. Thanks for coordinating this. It's great to hear the diversity of issues that each state can and does push. Obviously, it varies depending on the political climate. So, for Jamie Miner, I have been lobbying here in Sacramento for almost a decade. Before that, worked in the federal side of things for two Congress members. And the Blockchain Advocacy Coalition, based in California, was founded in 2018. And you may know Ali Medina, who's still on our board and still consults, but I've taken over a bit on the advocacy front just because there's been so much advocacy seen just a lot happening in this space. So nice to meet everybody. And then I will share my screen. Start in.
Sorry, that was me. I hit the wrong button. And the Blockchain Advocacy Coalition, for anyone that's interested in anything that's going in California, I would really strongly suggest coordinating via this BAC, Blockchain Advocacy Coalition, so that, we can synergize and coordinate as much as possible. All right.
Okay, can you see my screen? You good there?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. So yeah, it was a busy year. Before this year, really things were pretty quiet on the crypto front when it came to regulation. Our overseeing agency, the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation, was really taking regulation kind of on a case-by-case basis. Wanted some to seek licenses, others to determine that they weren't in fact in need of any sort of money transmitter license. And so while we were in constant coordination with them, offered them best practices, and just highlighted some of the good actors in the space and provided were there as a resource, there really was no overarching policy for virtual currency regulation, as I know isn't unique across the country. So in comes the governor's executive order in May. It was 7 key tenets, and I can quickly review them, but happy to also share the link, because there's a lot of good stuff in there, a lot of good language, very aggressive timelines. But the key tenets were to, 1, create a transparent and consistent business environment for companies operating in the blockchain and specifically crypto asset space. This was to harmonize federal and California laws, balance the benefits and risks to consumers, and incorporate California values such as equity, inclusivity, and environmental protection. Second is to collect feedback from a broad range of stakeholders in order to create a regulatory approach, especially on crypto asset harmonization between the feds and the states. Also exploring and establishing public serving use cases, such as incorporating blockchain technology into state operations, and then building out a research and workforce pipeline. Third, to collect feedback from a broad range of stakeholders for potential blockchain applications and ventures, with particular attention to crypto assets and related fintechs and technologies. Engagement should include technical experts, stakeholders interested in addressing inequities and the environmental impact, and then also include California companies, but also non-California companies. 4 was to engage in a public process and exercise statutory authority to help a comprehensive regulatory approach. Again, harmonizing with future federal regulations and guidance, and then also creating consumer protections. 5, engaging and encouraging regulatory clarity. 6, explore opportunities to develop blockchain technologies to address public serving and emerging needs. So this was a nod, obviously, to the larger Web3 ecosystem. So working with the private sector, academia, and the broader community to present pilots for policy programs, solutions, to showcase the potential of adopting blockchain technology. And then 7, to identify opportunities to create a research and workforce environment to power innovation in the blockchain space. So this is really, to build that pipeline for jobs in the emerging industry. So that's the EO in a nutshell. So why an EO? Obviously, each state, you see, executive action, you see action from legislatures. This governor has seen a theme of legislation via executive order or regulation via executive order. But there's a lot more baked into this that, reading between the lines. This is a very progressive Democrat, obviously, Governor Newsom. But what is most interesting about the executive order was who he tasked with implementation. So I kind of, chuckle when I hear, Lee and Wyoming folks talk about, the diversity of their proposals. California isn't going to open its doors to miners. We can barely keep our lights on during the summer. We're constantly being asked to curtail energy use for a number of reasons. So the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation has jurisdiction over fintech, including crypto companies, and that was pretty clear and direction given by the legislature a few years ago. But instead of tasking that agency to implement the executive order, while they have certain responsibilities within it, he really gave the leading role to the governor's office of business development. This was pretty disappointing for especially the consumer advocates who thought that EO would too narrowly focus on attracting businesses to the state and providing that clarity, not leaning in enough on the protection of consumers. So, some of you may have heard or seen the billboards or the full page newspaper ads or commercials in Texas, Indiana, Florida, touting some of the policies coming out of California by our governor. He's clearly running a nationwide campaign. The question is, what is the pathway, and how does that play into an executive order? This expansive. Many think he's laying the groundwork for a nationwide campaign in the event President Biden does not run for re-election. He knows he can't run against Biden, but he wants to be prepared. Should the party kind of walk away, or should he not seek re-election in 2024, so he can meet the moment on the national level. So he needs, some deliverables, and that's bringing jobs and new innovation to the state. He also has a pretty close circle of confidence in that are now in the crypto space, haven't always been, but you think about major investors like Ron Conway or Chris Lehane, who is the one who did that poll with Morning Consult on where is the Web3 voter. He comes from Airbnb and now is at One Ventures. Both of them are in Newsom's inner circle, advised him on a number of things. So it's no surprise that he has deep roots in tech, within the tech community, and they could very well be helpful behind the scenes and kind of coming up with some of these ideas. So implementation and next steps. In summer, this summer, we saw them hold a series of stakeholder meetings on a number of topics, including fintech, NFTs, venture capital, meta world, which we all were kind of scratching our head what that meant. Verifiable credentials, exchanges, and blockchain government services. So each meeting had about a dozen or so folks in it to share ideas, to talk about best practices, to give some direction as to what next steps should be within the EO. And then in August, the Department of Financial Innovation and Protection issued a request for comments on how crypto or virtual assets should be regulated. So those were due at the end of August, and they're synthesizing those and creating a report based on all those comments about next steps on how they should move forward with regulation. And then another timeline within the EO was within 60 days of President Biden's digital currency report. One of our state agencies must provide a report to the governor's office summarizing next steps and how to harmonize with what happened federally and what their approach suggestion is. Obviously, there wasn't a lot of clarity within that digital currency report. So it remains to be seen what California will do with that. Do they need to move forward with their own approach, or do they want to wait and see a little more clarity from the feds? And then also this winter, we'll see a publish of consumer protection principles. We'll also see a request for innovation ideas. This is the RFI process that some of the state agencies will go through in order to identify key blockchain use cases. So, broader than just virtual currency. Oh, sorry about that. So, when approaching any policy, obviously the political landscape is important to understand for context around what successes and challenges can look like. So just by way of background, Democrats have a super majority here in California, so that's a 2/3 a majority in both houses in the legislature. So for our visual learners, that's what that looks like in graph form, a lot of blue. I know this is something we all grapple with as we, adjust talking points for each political party, but so far, most all of our blockchain and crypto champions in the state have been Democrats. In fact, earlier this session, we saw a very progressive senator from LA who's likely to be in Congress next year. She introduced a bill allowing state agencies to allow crypto payments. The bill was one sentence. It wasn't very well thought out, and we did try to help the author narrow it and add meat to the bone around guardrails, so it actually had a chance. But she did not want to narrow the bill, so it ended up dying at its first policy committee. But it's just a theme she was attracted by, and others are as well, just the benefits that technology has for the unbanked. So I raise this all to say that they are key Democrats that support crypto policy if done right. So we do have some great champions in this space. So the legislature, how did they respond to the executive order? They were less than thrilled. They felt somewhat blindsided by the executive order. You really didn't work with them at all on it. I think they were frustrated they weren't consulted and that it was so focused on the business development side versus the consumer protection side. This was obviously after the fallout of Terra and the dip in the market. So we're hearing a lot of stories. Folks or constituents were calling in to their legislators that have been losing money. And then in June, after about a month after he dropped the EO, the chair of Banking and Finance in the Assembly, a Bay Area Democrat, Tim Grayson, introduced a 40-page licensure bill that goes further than the near fit license, but it does have a lot of the key themes. It also banned non-fiat backed stablecoins, and it limited crypto ATM withdrawals and deposits. So our organization opposed the bill out of the gate. We worked really closely with the office, and he did, take a lot of amendments and suggestions. He was very open to industry engaging. He had agreed to take out the stablecoin piece, but unfortunately, amendments were put back into the bill by the Senate that undid a lot of the compromises we had struck, and the bill was jammed through in the last few days of session. There really wasn't enough time to have kind of a robust policy discussion that we would have hoped for a bill this expansive. The author also promised all his colleagues that he would author cleanup legislation in 2023. The bill ended up passing overwhelmingly in the legislature. The industry was also a bit fragmented and all over the place on the bill. It wasn't really clear to legislators, if it was something that was livable or not. Obviously, our organization, wants to lean in on smart regulation and regulatory clarity, and wants to be there ultimately on a large framework like this. But this just didn't allow enough time to get it right. So you can kind of see who the support and the opposition was. Again, industry. We had some folks that kind of came in at the very end. Some Blockchain Association and others, but upon initial introduction, it was really a small swath of industry representation. So Governor Newsom signaled to the author early on that he had a lot of issues with the bill, not to mention that the bill had a fiscal tag of tens of millions of dollars for the department to set up this big of a program. They would have had to hire a bunch of new staff. And that wasn't negotiated in the budget process, which is a no-no when it comes to bills with that large of a fiscal tag. Tensions were also really high between at the end of session between the legislature and the governor, as they often can be. So they sent him the bill anyways, not knowing what their chances really were of a signature, but thought that just putting on his desk would have enough pressure given what they were seeing in the headlines for him to sign it. He did not engage on amendments or fixing the bill, nor did the department that would have to implement it. And while advocacy from industry in the legislature was a bit fragmented, you really saw more folks engage, nationwide with the governor, saying that this bill would stifle innovation. We have a ripple effect on states across the country as far as kind of a model bill for regulation, a framework for crypto asset regulation, kind of like what we saw via the California Privacy Protection Act. So ultimately, he vetoed the bill about I think a week after the Biden report was put out there, and then he focused in his executive order, or sorry, in his veto signing message, that it really did conflict with his executive order. He wanted to provide more clarity, not less, for the industry. He also thought it was essential that California's actions be predicated on harmonizing with the federal regulatory picture. So thankfully, his office didn't have much time to look into the federal report. Obviously the general consensus is that it did not, in fact, provide that regulatory framework folks were hoping for, which really just empowers the state even more. So we know we're going to see a bill next year, but I also thought it was kind of funny, this quote from one of the bill sponsors, that crypto bros won, consumers zero. The tale by the crypto community is saving the day, but obviously that caused a lot of frustration with the consumer advocates. So that was a funny quote. And then just on broader blockchain policies, we had another success. SB7 earlier in the year, legislative efforts to create a trust framework for verifiable credentials, which we sponsored. It got held up in a fiscal committee, just given the legwork that state agencies have to put into it. So we pivoted and worked with our blockchain champion author, Senator Hertzberg, pictured here, to pass a bill that allows counties to issue vital record documents via means of verifiable credentials using blockchain technology. So this idea came out of our California Blockchain Working Group report. It was co-sponsored by our association and then the Clerk County Recorders, and it was actually fun to see one of our more rural counties, Placer County, led the charge and helped testify in committee on this bill. With our earlier bill, we had built a lot of bridges with the ACLU, spent a lot of time with privacy advocates on educating them on verifiable credential technology, made a lot of inroads there. So ultimately, that proved beneficial. They asked a lot of questions about this bill, but they ultimately did not oppose it or take a position. So it got signed by the governor last week, and we're really excited about that success. So pretty successful year, but we know we have our work cut out for us next year. The governor or the author has already said of 2269 that he wants to introduce an additional bill next year, kind of starting over on virtual asset regulation. So we know that's coming, but in the meantime, we'll take these successes and happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Jamie, from California's Blockchain Advocacy Coalition. Looks like you had a very dramatic recent several months here with AB 2269 and was it SB 786? Amazing work.
Yeah, fun. Thank you.
Maybe on the verifiable credentials, because in Washington we didn't have such success, especially working with the ACLU. Can you describe some of the talking points that you had with the ACLU and the privacy groups that seem to help neutralize some of their concerns?
Yeah, I mean, it really was spending a whole hour with them explaining the technology and how it works, how one is the holder of their information, how, at the end of the day, that enhances one's privacy. They just asked a ton of questions on, just the ins and outs of verifiable credentials and, what that means. I think they had one perception going into the call, and then after they just had a much better sense. So really, I mean, it just was focusing on that and, making sure they truly understood how, one can be the master of their identity, and that ended up, working with them in the end. I think they still had a lot of questions, going into this bill, but didn't thought because it's not mandating counties to use this technology, it's just permissive in nature, and that allowing them to do so, they didn't end up weighing in or having major concerns. And want to work with kind of these counties on a case-by-case basis.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, we'll definitely take those notes and learn from that. Call for questions or comments. Anybody, attendees, you can drop it into the chat or text it to me, however way you'd like to ask questions. Otherwise, with AB 2269, it seems like a hot topic with a lot of crypto related companies. So did you get some, I guess, other crypto companies, whether into California or outside of California, chiming in or interested in what was going on there with the stablecoin issue?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of companies, reached out, wanted to know what was happening on the ground. Yeah, and again, I think because folks thought when it was initially introduced that it wouldn't ultimately be successful in the legislature, and it had a huge fiscal tag, and usually bills like that get caught up in appropriations. And I think even the author didn't think it would make it out.
Wow.
Because of that, people were just kind of waiting to see it kind of die on its own, of its own weight. And then when that didn't happen, it was kind of a shock for folks that, oh, okay, well, we actually have to lean in on getting this right. But at that point, there really was about a week until the amendment deadline, and the author said, you know what, let's just get this to the governor's office and focus on cleanup next year. So, a lot of these are California-based companies that I think could have leaned in on the licensing framework, but there were other provisions that really, with the stablecoin ban, and I think there was fear of that ripple effect. So that's at the end of the day what you saw folks focus on, talking point wise with the governor on why put this specific limitation on a specific technology, and kind of box that in ahead of the feds, ahead of any other state. We don't want to be the one to do that here in California and stifle that innovation. So it was good to see, kind of industry come together once it was on his desk. And you've seen his governor, his Office of Business Development super engaged. They spoke at Circle's big conference in San Francisco last week. His Chief Dee Myers, who's the chief of that office, business innovation, and also the Department of Finance lead for him. So yeah, obviously they see the value in the technology and using it in California and want that to kind of be their mark. So I think the outcome, it was a good learning process for all of industry, just on the potential of the industry and how important it is to California as we have so many companies based there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Katie of Hawaii, Katie Jackson. I think this is in relation to what you just said. She asked, any support from Silicon Valley companies, or did they just sit this one out?
Yeah, I think a lot of them weighed in, especially via their trade associations, but also, on behalf of their companies too. Silicon Valley has a big voice in Sacramento, so the author was really open to kind of hearing some of the implementation concerns, just hoping that it wouldn't turn into something like the New York Bit license. But again, I think at the end of the day, nobody thought that it had a chance of passing, including author. So it just, it was like this weird game that everybody was kind of waiting to see what happened, and then boom, it just moved quickly to the governor, and we just had to pivot our messaging. But yes, I think I don't want to name names, but there were kind of some big players in this space that engaged directly with the governor's office, that engaged directly with the author, understanding that California really needs to get this right, to set the right market signal for the entire industry.
Thank you. And then another question from Katie of Hawaii. Do you get a sense that next week's bill will start from the same place, New York Bit license like regulation, or do you think the starting place of writing the new bill will shift to be more permissive or restrictive?
I think, we'll probably see a rulemaking or some sort of regulatory effort from the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation come pretty quickly, maybe by the end of this year. And I think some of the key tenets within 2269 on disclosures, different, that framework, what one has to put into their license, what information they have to submit. reporting on outages, reporting on, just some of the standards they use when it comes to, kind of with more of a security like treatment of digital assets within their platform. So, I think they'll probably pull from a lot of the provisions of 2269. I think, they hopefully will harmonize some of the definitions with what we've seen federally or in other states that have worked. A lot of that language came from the ULC that was adopted in Louisiana, except for the disclosure language and some of the best interests and best recommendations when it comes to certain offerings. So, and then the big question remains around stablecoin legislation and what we see federally. I think that'll set the tone, and then California will fill in the gaps. But hopefully, something happens where there at least is a framework that California can point to on non-fiat backed stablecoins. Whether it's a on-chain, when it comes to algorithmic stablecoins, what sort of backing one must have in order to have that offering in the state. We're hopeful that there's some leadership at the federal level that California can kind of mirror, or else I think we can definitely see something on that front, sort of technology banner.
Yeah, there I would shout out to Louisiana you mentioned, and shout out to Wyoming on that front too. So lots of good ideas. Mayor Dan Spooler from North Carolina says, we applaud Governor Newsom for vetoing the crypto licensing and regulatory framework. Brigetta Pinuski from Oregon says, are you coming across any persistent myths that still need to be dispelled?
Yeah, I think one that we saw constantly was just kind of the predatory nature, that in quotes, of some of these companies, the amount of marketing that has gone into it, the mention of the Super Bowl ads. I think legislators had not that is predatory, but the legislators had some concerns about how that's translated to the everyday person, and kind of the lack of education that can, kind of the action that we saw out of Gary Gensler and Kim Kardashian yesterday, just this, how these companies are selling these products, what that means for the everyday person, with maybe a limited knowledge base. But we all know that's a myth because of just the user that does hold these financial assets. So yeah, we have a lot of work to do on the education front, but constantly bringing up the Super Bowl, constantly bringing up kind of this celebrity focus that a lot of companies use. That is a big concern to Democratic legislators, and maybe some of the un- and underbanked communities that might be more persuaded by some of these marketing tactics. That's a concern.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting. The energy, climate change was the governor's #1 focus this year in California, but kind of that larger energy use, proof of work conversation never really came up in the bills. You didn't see any of the environmental groups engaged. It's something that in implementing the EO that they're supposed to look at. But to the extent you would think, based on a state that has the most aggressive climate change policies in the nation and sometimes in the world, it really was missing from the conversation. So that, just to bring that up doesn't mean that will always be the case. But I know, that conversation has evolved a lot nationally, but that never really came up, or wasn't a major factor when the bill was deliberated.
Interesting.
Point that out.
I know it'll be a pretty hot topic potentially over here in Washington. I think it'll be a top of mind for us over here.
Yeah, and obviously in New York, maybe they just wanted to get the licensure bill right, and then they'll move to things like that.
Great question, Brigetta. Other questions? And type it into the chat or drop it into the Q&A bucket or even text it to me. I'm checking texts and also Slack. All right, well, maybe we're a little ahead of time, which is great. I can give everyone some time back at the end. Thank you, Jamie from California. Lauren Kimsky says, great update, Jamie. Thank you. Thank you for spending your time with us and giving us all the insights on California. And if anyone wants to get in touch with Jamie, just let me know and I'll help you connect.
Gary.
Well, a little ahead of schedule. I can give you a few minutes to get set up here, but I think next up we have North Carolina. We have Agnes Gamble and Dan Spooler, aka Mayor Dan Spooler, presenting North Carolina. They had a sandbox bill that was really popular, and then they also had the Crypto Innovation Council, I believe, that kicked off from that. And so they're going to be giving an update on that. Looks like Agnes is not in right now. So how about with that, we'll give it a 10-minute break. And then we'll come back at about 12:10 Pacific. But I will remain here if you want to chat or ask questions on anything in the meantime. Sound good? All right, so 12:10 we'll come back, and that's when Agnes and Dan will present on all things North Carolina. Thank you, everyone. And I'll pause the recording for now so you don't have to have that in the meantime. All right, I restarted the recording. Remember, there's going to be a recording available afterwards as soon as it's done processing via the WTIA, so that we can all share and recapture our moments here together today. Also to share it with anybody that missed the Unconference. All right, next up we have Agnes Gamble and Dan Spooler from North Carolina. Oh, sorry, my tongue got tied there. Dan Spooler.
Thanks, Ari. Thank you, everyone. So Agnes and I are going to give a brief update of what we've been up to in North Carolina. Also on the call is Eric Porper. He's in the audience. He's our fellow co-chair who's been active with us too. So I'd like to start with just kind of a little historical overview, and then we'll go into where we are as an entity. So in North Carolina in early 2015, at the request of the Commissioner of Banks, the state legislature considered an overhaul of the state money transmitters law. And it included a quite broad language rather, that could have been interpreted to capture certain virtual currency models. And at the time, New York State's BIT license was just getting off the ground. And we felt that this was an enormous opportunity for North Carolina to kind of swoop in and become a little bit more competitive, especially because outside of New York, the state of Charlotte, North Carolina had the largest concentration of large scale banks. So we worked with some key stakeholders to propose some exemptions within this proposed legislation that included multi-sig wallets, non-hosted wallets, smart contract platforms, and then colored coins, which this is ancient history, but at the time, colored coins were somewhat of a precursor to what we now know as NFTs. So these efforts were unsuccessful the first go round, but by early 2016, at the next session, we were able to convince the state and the House through a lot of elbow grease and a lot of wheeling and dealing to get these officials to embrace a more business-friendly approach within the blockchain ecosystem. And that was with the passage of HB 289, that was the name of it, North Carolina Money Transmitters Act of 2016, that was signed into law by the governor. And all in all, that took about 16 months. It was a 16-month campaign. Once that concluded, that certainly put us on the map. It put us fairly competitive in early phases of this state level legislation. Once that concluded, North Carolina somewhat plateaued until we were able to pool our resources together and approach the then Lieutenant Governor's office to help us in developing a state-appointed blockchain working group or task force, which is now known as the NCBI, the North Carolina Blockchain Initiative. And the goal of this was to develop a comprehensive report, a taxonomy, and a series of recommendations that we would then be able to present to the Lieutenant Governor's office and then the state legislature. We're happy to share with this PDF that we've done. This was taking place mostly during the pandemic, so we had a lot of time to really work on it. And it began, again, late 2019 when the task force was formed. And the pandemic hampered our efforts for a roadshow and a listening tour, which is what we intended to do. So instead, we developed a series of YouTube videos, did a lot of, highlighted a lot of great startups within North Carolina. And we really dug deep into the report process. And through that report process, I think it's about 70 or 80 pages, we developed a 3-step proposal. Step 1, pragmatic legislative considerations. Step 2, initiatives to promote investment in innovation. And then step 3, regulatory amendments to promote blockchain innovation as well. So the first step were, we thought, fairly pragmatic, easy lifts that included having the state informally acknowledge that the technological neutral drafting of the MC Uniform Electronic Transaction Act, UETA, adequately addresses legal enforceability of smart contracts, e-sig, and electronic recording. We also thought it would be nice if the state could adopt legislation incorporating blockchain and smart contract taxonomy into state code, and providing some clarifications. But step 2 was more of an effort to promote investment and innovation, and that included one of our calls to create a regulatory sandbox and innovation council, which we'll get to in a second. Agnes will present on that. We also called for the state to invest in broadband infrastructure and technology talent programs in the rural parts of the state. And then we also suggested the state reinstate what we call a qualified business venture tax credit program and broaden the definition of a qualified business venture to include blockchain companies. We had a few other ideas. Again, we can send you over our executive summary, which consolidates most of the report into our actionable items, but we intended to do baby steps. And we, after searching long and wide really for where we think we can have the most success after the Money Transmitters Act, was the sandbox idea. 2 years earlier, there was an attempt to introduce a regulatory sandbox, fintech regulatory sandbox, that died. It died in committee. So instead of reinventing the wheel, we approached this group and we said, we have a lot in common. Let's work together on this. Let's reintroduce it. Let's make some tweaks. We made some changes to bake in blockchain verbatim. And we also pushed for the development of Innovation Council. And as part of that regulatory development, we also were able to secure the Lieutenant Governor's office to have an appointee on that council. So the governor has appointments, the state Senate president, and the speaker of the House, and now the Lieutenant Governor has that. So here we are today. Agnes, we're fortunate, was the one who was actually appointed to the Innovation Council on behalf of the North Carolina Blockchain Initiative, and she's been leading the charge really on our end from the rulemaking process. But I just want to point out before she goes that this sandbox bill was unanimously approved in both chambers of the House and signed into law by the governor, which is highly unusual in a state like ours. Our state's it's fairly purple, but it's a Republican legislature and a Democratic governor. And for something like this at this scale to pass unanimously, we felt was a big a win for the industry. And we think parts of this could potentially work in other states. So with that, I'll let Agnes proceed and do her presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And let me just share my screen. And thank you, Ari, for organizing this conference and bringing all the states together to work on all of these important issues.
Yes, and hopefully next year we'll be able to do it in person.
Yeah. Okay, hang on a second. Let me get this up.
No problem. You can see your screen, so it's good.
Okay. All right, cool. So, okay, I thought it would be helpful to give some highlights about North Carolina's sandbox legislation and our strategy, and then talk about some of the lessons that we have learned thus far. But first, let me explain what a sandbox is for those of you who aren't familiar with the concept. Regulatory sandboxes were first developed by regulators in the United Kingdom to address the problem that regulations do not keep up with the pace of innovation. And so this lag creates problems for entrepreneurs who cannot comply with laws because of the lack of clarity or the fact that current regulations do not address the unusual issues that novel technologies create. And regulatory sandboxes were therefore created to provide a time-limited safe harbor for companies to operate without worrying about regulatory enforcement despite these gray areas in the law. So sandboxes give regulators an opportunity to learn about cutting edge technology and revise outdated regulations that don't apply well to these new technologies. So the whole point of regulatory sandboxes is to promote innovation while also helping regulators respond more quickly to new technologies. Okay, so as Dan said, in North Carolina, regulatory sandbox legislation was first introduced in 2019, but unfortunately that legislation attempt failed. In early 2021, the North Carolina Blockchain Initiative contacted the original sandbox legislation team to rethink the sandbox legislative design and help move the legislation forward. So after revising the old sandbox legislation, we were able to submit a new model to the North Carolina General Assembly, which passed unanimously in both chambers, and this was only 7 months later. So during the process of revision, we worked with the Carolina FinTech Hub, and they're based in Charlotte, North Carolina. They're also a nonprofit that, among other things, they facilitate collaborations between fintech startups and financial services firms. And as many of you know, there are many of those financial services firms in Charlotte. We also sought out research expertise from the Mercatus Center and the Libertas Institute, and then had representatives from the John Locke Foundation testify about the sandbox bill before the General Assembly. And then 2 law firms were also involved in shepherding the bill through the legislative process, and they also met with various stakeholders about the sandbox bill. So the North Carolina sandbox model is unique in a few different ways. First of all, there's a low application fee of $50, which makes the sandbox accessible to a wide range of people. And nonprofits are encouraged to work with entrepreneurs during the application stage and during the sandbox testing period. And these nonprofits play a really important role in developing the sandbox ecosystem, and they can also act as accelerators or incubators that support participants in the sandbox. The North Carolina model is also focused on fintech and insurtech, but it also has a specific mandate in the bill or in the act to study and recommend blockchain applications for the state and any industry in the state. And then finally, the bill created a multi-agency innovation council, which has this special type of executive authority to grant regulatory waivers to sandbox participants. So the North Carolina Innovation Council is made up of 11 members, including agency representatives from the Commissioner of Banks, the Commissioner of Insurance, and the Secretary of State. And this multi-agency collaboration is important because it facilitates open dialogue between not only regulators and entrepreneurs, but also regulators at the different state agencies whose jurisdictional focus is closely related. And the Innovation Council also acts as an open forum where regulators are challenged to review and refine regulations. So some of the lessons that I can share with you can be summed up in the simple fact that the hard work begins after the sandbox legislation passes. And so creating a sandbox from an administrative point of view is no small task, and it requires regulatory resources, including staff, IT services, and time and expertise from the Innovation Council to design governance and procedures in a fair and transparent manner. So if you are looking to use the North Carolina legislation as a model, I would suggest thinking about your governance model and clarifying whether or not the Innovation Council has rulemaking authority that would give it the ability to grant waivers and design the application process from scratch. I would also suggest forming public-private partnerships in advance to create an innovative sandbox ecosystem that is sustainable. Also, marketing and promoting the sandbox seems like a no-brainer, but more time and resources really should be spent on these initiatives to attract entrepreneurs. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a shiny sandbox bill, but no applicants and no meaningful economic activity for your state. So I want to close by sharing some research I've been doing on reciprocity provisions in sandbox legislation that I think is really important for you to consider as you draft legislation or move it forward if you've already introduced it. So currently only 7 states that have sandboxes offer reciprocity. And reciprocity gives entrepreneurs the ability to form reciprocity agreements which would allow them to transact in other state sandboxes. So as a result, reciprocity creates an opportunity for sandboxes to access a larger geographical market and get multi-jurisdictional sandbox relief. So state-specific money transmission laws are one example of where multi-jurisdictional relief would result in significant cost savings for startups. And multi-state reciprocity also allows for states to create regional sandboxes, which is a good thing for states that are less populated or don't have many potential applicants. So by joining forces with other states with reciprocity agreements, states could share entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs could share the benefits of multiple sandboxes. So again, my name is Agnes Gamble West, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact me at my Mercatus email address.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan and Agnes, and also Eric from North Carolina. We'll take questions and or comments for the North Carolina team now. Dan says, thank you for the opportunity to present. Yes, thank you, everyone. Questions? Agnes, do you know off the top of your head the 7 states that do have reciprocity?
I do. Hang on one second. I've got it written down. Okay, so it's Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, Nevada, Utah, West Virginia, and Wyoming. And so the ones that don't are Kentucky, South Dakota, Vermont, and Hawaii. They have sandboxes, but they don't have reciprocity. So that might be something, you know, states could do to amend their current bills, or anybody who is introducing new legislation. If they can add that provision in, it will be helpful in the long run.
Cool, very informative. Katie Jackson of Hawaii says, this is great information. Thank you. Can you speak to the successes of the sandbox?
So the North Carolina sandbox, well, since the Innovation Council was officially formed at the beginning of this year, and we are still currently in the process of getting things up and running. So when I was referring to the part about the hard work begins after the legislation passes, I can fully attest to that. It's been a lot of hard work. We meet on a monthly basis. Were not getting paid for this, and we have to basically work with regulators as well, which some of whom are risk adverse. So getting everybody on the same page as to what our goals are, and actually designing this process and constantly redirecting the conversation in a pro-innovation, pro-entrepreneurial direction, that takes work, and not losing sight of the overarching mission, but also just the administrative tasks. Like we have to set up a website, we have to create a database for all of the applications to go into that's privacy protected. We have to think about getting staff who's gonna field questions, create the FAQ for any potential applicant who's interested, basically passing along applications to the correct parties and to the correct representatives at the regulatory agencies. So we finally got the website up and running, and we're in the process of making a couple of technical clarifications in the bill or in the act that will help us to formally create rules that, because basically once the Innovation Council has this authority, it has to be able to do its job, but in order to do that, it has to be spelled out in a very transparent way, because you don't want it to seem like the Innovation Council is making their decisions just in some ambiguous way, because that opens up the potential to lawsuits. So everything has to be very clear, and it has to be written down officially and formally and signed off on. So that's the hard part, getting everything up and running and formally signed off on and legally compliant. But we, to answer your question, we've received a lot of inquiries about the sandbox, and so there's a lot of interest. I can at least say that.
And I want to reiterate too the fact that this is a multi-agency sandbox. I think that's a differentiator between some of the other attempts that have been made in other states and even in some federal agencies. But with that comes sometimes, I mean, there's great benefits to that, but it also creates sometimes more, not red tape, but all these agencies now need to collaborate. And then where would it fit, under what agency would it fit under from a structural standpoint? Agnes, I think you're working closely at this point with the Banking Commissioner's Office.
Could you say that one more time? I couldn't hear you.
So in terms of the Banking Commissioner's Office, at this point, isn't the sandbox, it doesn't fit under any one agency right now, but isn't the commissioners of banks currently doing a lot of the actual oversight of the operations?
Yeah, so I guess one of the things that I would recommend, again, if you're using the North Carolina model as a potential, or using the legislation as a potential model, you need to decide who is actually going to administer the sandbox, because whatever agency that goes into, that comes with money, comes with funding, and that's an important consideration. And yes, the North Carolina Office of the Commissioner of Banks currently is kind of taking the lead on this. But, depending on what you want for your specific state, you should really be thinking about which regulator is the most pro-innovation, because we actually have a commissioner of banks that actually gets it and is pretty friendly towards innovation and these sorts of initiatives. You don't want it to be somewhere where there's going to be a hostile attitude towards it. That's just another piece of advice, but you also want to think about budgetary issues as well. And if you decide to have the sandbox sit within a specific regulatory agency, you would also need to clarify that regulatory agency doesn't have basically the quote unquote executive authority to make the decisions and grant the waivers. You want that responsibility really shared amongst the members of the Innovation Council, because the reason why is because administrations change, and so if you get somebody who's friendly towards sandbox policies this time around, who knows how that might change going forward. So the Innovation Council kind of mitigates that risk.
And that goes back to the point of how every state's different. And these are lessons that can be learned from other states on the call, but what may work in our state, where we have a really good working relationship with our Commissioner of Banks, because she helped us previously with the Money Transmitter Act. Your state you may have a closer relationship with the Secretary of State or the Attorney General. Every state's different, and it's important to build those relationships early on before you consider such a thing. And then back to the budgetary discussions, laws can be amended, obviously, in the future. Budgets can be made too. So perhaps in the next session or the following session, there may be an appropriation for some funding. So this is, it's a living, breathing experiment, but so far so good.
Really helpful. Thank you for the additional context, Agnes and Dan. Looks like Agnes also shared an article about reciprocity in the chat. I will copy and share with everyone. There you go. Article about reciprocity is now in the chat. And I guess maybe looks like a lot of operational the reality of operations comes to life once the bill passes, and that's very, very important, especially when working in the public sector. Question about Agnes. What are some of the bullet points that you've heard or you've used in helping redirect conversations that may be going off course or digressing during one of these meetings? Can you share some of those?
Oh, well, what I usually do is I point directly to the language in the statute, and we have several legislative findings that kind of nicely frame what we're doing and why we're doing it. And that speaks for itself. They can't ignore that.
So in the meeting, you'll call out and remind everyone, hey, we're here to do this. Let's stay focused on this.
Yeah, because I think, it's natural for regulators to be more risk adverse than some of the public members on the council. And so if there is, if I can tell that, the discussion is becoming too risk adverse to where it kind of gets in the way of our goals, then I will just try to remind everyone what we're trying to do here and what we're trying to achieve. And, if I need to reference the statute, then I definitely do that.
Good point. Other questions or comments from the audience? You can use the Q&A or you can use the chat function in the Zoom window. Or you can hunt me down via text message, email, and or Slack. Otherwise, Agnes, Dan, and or Eric, if you have questions, you can always find them. Very, very friendly North Carolinians. I will happily connect you too if you'd like to connect with them afterwards. All right, going once. Going twice. Ooh, Greg. Greg asked, on the money transmitter issue and other states going the route of South Dakota, substantial requirement increases.
What was the question?
I'm not sure if it's a question. It might be a comment. On the money transmitter issue and on other states going the route of South Dakota, substantial requirement increases.
Okay, well, I think he might be meaning some of the requirements for one of the reasons why we actually pursued this now, 7-8 years ago, was a lot of the startups wouldn't have been able to afford the very, very costly requirements for a surety bond, but also for the licensures. And that's something to consider. Now, all states are different regarding that, but we thought that was going to be a big hindrance to a lot of startups, not just even in the blockchain community, but for a lot of fintech related companies.
Yeah, actually, I think Washington State, we have one of the lowest requirements around that. Looks like South Dakota was $30 million. Is that right?
Yeah, that probably sounds about right. I mean, that's an enormous cost for a lot of companies. And it's really, a lot of the times these large scale financial institutions build moats to prevent such a thing. And they have a lot of influence at the legislative level to prevent those from being changed.
Right. That's very, very informative. Greg also writes, of Virginia, we have a Virginia-based company that will have to leave the state from these requirements.
Yeah, I think one of the goals that we were trying to achieve with the North Carolina legislation was, that differs with other states, is that we didn't want to put caps on the number of consumers that companies could reach or specific thresholds for the dollar amount of transactions that companies can transact with specific consumers. And we also didn't put a mandatory requirement for bonds, for example. And I think the reason is because a lot of the companies that we want to enter into the state sandbox are going to be the ones that are not these established incumbents like the big banks. And our view is that anybody can enter the sandbox. We have tried to leave it as open and broad as possible, just so that we're not creating an unlevel playing field for all participants, but we also don't want it to be uncompetitive for startups either, who can't meet these $30 million requirements, or things that would just be impossible for maybe someone coming out of like a college accelerator program or something like that.
Extremely, yes. Very, we want to make sure that we have we allow innovation, we allow the entrepreneurs and startups to have a chance at thriving. All right, other questions or comments? Otherwise, we're going to move on to our one of the final pieces of this Unconference. We'll be hearing from Dennis Porter of the Satoshi Action Fund next. Thank you so much, Dan, Agnes, and Eric from North Carolina for sharing your insights. And I think Dennis will be on in just a couple minutes. Actually, Agnes or Dan, one quick question. What's next up as we head into 2023 for North Carolina?
Well, I can go and I know Agnes, you may have some thoughts on that too, but one of the issues that we're considering now actually potentially has something to do with the next speaker, Dennis. Historically, we've been doing a lot of issues regarding financial services when it comes to cryptocurrencies, but the next frontier, in my opinion, could be energy, which is regulated at the state level, and so regarding that, we're considering some mining legislation, looking at the great work that they've done in Texas and some other states, because we do have a lot of mining operations within North Carolina that we want to maybe take that to the next level, and that's kind of what I have in mind.
That's true. There's been a lot of large mining corporations moving to North Carolina or setting up there. Is there like special regulations or a special environment in North Carolina that makes it attractive?
Yes. So we actually had, over the last 3 months, actually, we've been facilitating some site visits, actually, with our Lieutenant Governor and with Congressman Ted Budd, who's now running for U.S. Senate. We visited some Bitcoin mining facilities within the state. And the proprietors of these mining facilities are having a pretty difficult time with rates and with interacting with the largest utility player in the state, which is Duke Energy. It's really at this point the only large energy utility in the state, and with that they have a lot of political influence in the legislature, and it's all about education. And I think we're going to continue to do these site visits to educate hands-on some of these regulators, elected officials, and then the Utilities Commission particularly, to explain to them the benefits of Bitcoin mining and hopefully work with these proprietors on some rate issues. But again, it's very early, but we're looking at it. And I think perhaps the Satoshi Action Fund might be able to be a part of this.
Yeah, I've noticed all the photos on social media between North Carolina and Texas on the site visit. So it's a really great idea and a great it's sort of a way to engage policymakers and give them they're there and make it real.
It's worked
for them. Yeah, it's
really worked for us, especially in blockchain. Sometimes it's hard to find a tangible entity to highlight, and this really does work. It's funny when you get them in there and they actually get to see proof of work in action, or just discussing the jobs that it creates and the tax revenue it creates. It really opens up a lot of eyes.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan and Agnes and Eric, for all your work in North Carolina. Next up, we'll hear from Dennis Porter, and he's the CEO of the Satoshi Action Fund. There isn't really a lot of model legislation going around in our space, but Satoshi Action Fund has been doing a lot of work specifically focused on Bitcoin mining. And there's a lot of states that have shown interest in this model legislation. So we're giving him the floor for 10 to 15 minutes to share his work and model legislation around Bitcoin mining. And we'll have some questions after that. And then we'll open up the mic for open mic session for any states that are on to share updates with others. All right, Dennis, you have the floor.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you great.
Awesome. Do you see my slides?
Yes, and your great mugshot. Thank you.
Yeah, it's coined the angry Dennis mugshot. This is what happens when you don't introduce my model policy. This face comes out. So I'm sure you're all laughing silently on mute. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. My name is Dennis Porter. I'm going to be going over, as Ari mentioned, some of the model policy that we've crafted in-house at Satoshi Action Fund. I'll try to keep this intro about our organization like super quick, but small thing about me, started Satoshi Action Fund in June. However, been working actively in the Bitcoin and Bitcoin political space for over a year and a half now, and have a background in campaign management, grassroots organization, and policy work as well. Here is our quick blurb about our team. By the way, if you want to read more about them or see more about them, I'm happy to share more of this information with you. But just to give you a good understanding that a lot of this model policy comes from energy experts, policy experts, regulatory, environmental grid, methane mining, on-grid mining experts as well. So we kind of come up with the thoughts ourselves at the higher level, and then we vet it through a lot of our advisory board members who are experts in their own right, in their own respective fields. Our 4 pieces of key model policy that we are working on and have mostly completed, 3 out of the 4 of these are 100% complete, and are going to be introducing them at the state level. Just to mention, we are a state level focused organization. We don't really do much at the federal level at all, although we have plenty of connections there. If something does make sense for us to get active in the federal side, if some of our work can be duplicated there, we're happy to work with anyone that wishes to duplicate some of these efforts. But the 4 key pieces of model policy that we've created, one is in reference to microgrids. It'll help attract new generation to your state, as well as Bitcoin mining as the investor of first resort on those new energy projects. And I'll go into a little more detail on each of these in just a moment so you have a better framework, but this is just an overview. Orphan Well 1 helps states attract miners to your state in order to clean up the environmental problem caused by orphaned oil wells. We have a mining council bill, which essentially could be passed as a resolution. In some states, establishes a mining council in your state for the purposes of studying the potential positive impacts that Bitcoin mining has to offer. And the last one, mining protection, which protects Bitcoin mining from discrimination in your state, which is very appealing to industry players who fear government crackdowns. Let's get into the first one here. This is just a screenshot of our Microgrid and Grid Resiliency Act. To me, this is probably the most important one. It's my favorite one. So if you tend to hear me talking about it the most after this call, or if you see me around town, this is the one that I like to talk about. I think it has a big potential to help states improve their generation. If renewables are a focus for your state, this is especially attractive, and it will also help attract miners there as the investor of first resort. I'll tell you what that means in a second, but first let me tell you the problems with microgrids in the past. So oftentimes microgrids create too much energy and they don't have a way to offload it. And so islanding is very difficult. And so they tend to need to apply for grid interconnections. But grid internet connections are slow, they take a very long time, and oftentimes utilities don't like them because they are having to manage all this excess generation that they didn't create and that they're not getting a good price on. So they tend to not like giving you the grid interconnect. Obviously, this is different. Some states have their own microgrid policies and have been able to pass them, but I find them to be relatively unsuccessful in attracting Bitcoin miners or mass scale new generation, which is really what we need on the renewable side in particular. The way that Bitcoin mining fixes this is first of all, it can come in and it can buy up all the excess generation. So if you are starting a microgrid and you have a lot of excess generation, instead of trying to wait for the grid interconnect, you can essentially just make a long-term power purchase agreement with a Bitcoin miner. They can come in, buy up all the excess generation. The way that we got utilities to like it is we said that when you create a microgrid inside what would be a microgrid zone, you have to apply for a grid interconnection. However, you do not have to wait for that grid interconnection to begin building, generating, or consuming the electricity on site. And in fact, you don't ever have to. You could go on forever continuing to do that, continuing to work that process without waiting for a grid interconnect, which is appealing for people who want to fund these operations. But the other thing we said, though, to make sure that utilities want to buy into this, because they could be a major obstacle to something like this in your state. They tend to not like when you go after their business model or change your business model in any way, shape, or form. What we said was, once you do receive a grid interconnect, that your microgrid must perform demand and frequency, secondary frequency response for the grid. And these are basically ancillary services that Bitcoin mining is uniquely positioned to be able to perform. Every generation mix needs more demand response, particularly in states where you want to have more renewables. If you listen to the IEA reports, they say we need 500 gigawatts of demand response by 2030 in order to reach the renewable and decarbonization goals. Many utilities have decarbonization goals. So all you got to do is bring up flexible load to a utility, and they'll be, and tell them that Bitcoin mining can solve this problem, and their ears will perk up, because many of them are looking for ways to bring in more flexible load. And I can go into detail on ancillary services, demand response, frequency response, anytime you want. I have a whole presentation on it that I do if you guys are interested in getting into the details of that. But ultimately, this is good for your state because it brings in new generation, brings in Bitcoin mining, which is a new nascent tech infrastructure industry, can bring jobs, can stabilize the grid, and more. Let's see, some areas of this bill are malleable. This last point here. This is, again, just to put this out there to reaffirm that this is model policy. Every state is so different. I've already heard a couple people kind of bring that up during the call, and we recognize that, and we're happy and excited to work with everybody here to be able to help fit this model policy within your state's framework. The progress with this bill, the language is 100% finalized, although again, we're open to suggestions or ways to improve it. It was recently introduced in New Hampshire, as you can see here, by Representative Keith Amon. Several other states are readying to introduce this policy. It is workable, as far as we know, in 49 states. The only state we're concerned that it may not be necessary would be Texas, because they have their own giant microgrid, essentially. So we're still working, chatting with people there, trying to figure out if it makes sense. We also had a recent op-ed in Real Clear Energy about microgrids and the potential for Bitcoin mining to play a role in those. If you want to read that article, this presentation, I can send it to you. And each of these articles that you'll see, there's more like this. Each of these have their own link, so you'll be able to click on them and read more about microgrids. But here's just a quick splash of various articles about microgrids. Microgrids are not something we made up. They've been around for a while, very popular in the renewable community, very popular in the environmental community, very popular among people who want to distribute energy resources and to remove the centralization of energy generation. This also is very good for people who are in the national security side of things, because they want to reduce the amount of centralization to help kind of reduce the attack surface by nation state actors outside the country. A couple points that I'd like to point out here in these articles. One is there's a couple places that you can see where quite a bit of jobs are created. That top right one is from a research report from Guidehouse. Guidehouse is a massive consulting firm and does a lot of research in the space on all things energy. And I'd highly encourage you to go read that report. It's huge and massive, and it will make you super bullish on microgrids. Bottom right-hand corner, Biden recently signed in the infrastructure bill over $350 billion for microgrids, EVs, clean energy incentives. So in theory, you could be attracting Bitcoin mining while using federal grant money to bring that mining and generation to your state. So all good things when you can get some of that federal money. The next bill here is our orphaned oil well bill. The basic premise of this one, and here's just again the bill text itself, and it's long. Both of these are all longer, but just wanted to give you a snapshot of kind of what our style looks like. The basic premise of the need for this is that the United States uniquely manages its oil wells in a very different way than many other countries. Most countries, energy and oil is all state owned, so they don't really have this problem. And the problem is that during boom and bust cycles, irresponsible companies decide to abandon wells and just kind of leave them wide open. And ultimately that results in a big hole in the earth where methane emissions are being emitted. And sometimes there are other environmental problems associated. As you all know, or most of you know, and hopefully you will know now, that methane is 84 times worse over a 20-year period than carbon dioxide for warming. It is 27 times worse over a 100-year period for warming, and these numbers are getting worse, especially as the fires increase and fires become a common fuel for the chemistry process that actually takes methane out of the atmosphere. So those numbers might be getting worse over time. Methane is considered to be the ultimate dangerous situation right now, as we realize that it is way worse of a problem than we originally realized. And so orphan wells are a big contributor to that. There are other contributors as well, such as landfills, which we plan on working on legislation on landfills in the future to help encourage that process. But that's more of a municipal problem, less so a state issue. So Bitcoin mining can essentially, what it can do is, because it is location agnostic, it can go to remote areas, and all it needs is an internet connection. What you can do is you can go to these orphan wells and put a Bitcoin miner on top of them and combust the methane, turn it into carbon dioxide, which is by every major environmental organization on the planet considered to be a very positive thing for the environment, even though it seems kind of counterintuitive that you're combusting and turning methane into CO2. I would highly encourage you to deep dive on the way that this stuff is viewed by environmental groups, and every single one will try to tell you either that you should combust it or you should put it into a pipeline or electrify it, turn it into electricity, which is what would be happening here with Bitcoin mining. You would be turning it into electricity, mining Bitcoin with it. It can help your state achieve a reduction in net emissions. In fact, every MCF of methane that you take out of the atmosphere and combust into CO2 has a measured CO2 equivalent. It's called CO2e. And every time that number goes down, obviously the EPA and everybody within your state that is working on environmental issues is very happy. This is also really good for FUD busting on Bitcoin mining. If you're interested in trying to help make sure that Bitcoin mining is, receiving some positive news, this is a great one. Proves that Bitcoin mining can be used for environmental cleanup, and it's not just consuming too much energy, so to speak. It'll look different in every state. Every single state has a completely different oil and gas regime. So Texas will look different from California. This also, progress of this bill, language is finalized. Finally, it took a long time to do. It was a lot of work. I can explain to you that on a future call if you're interested, or at the end if you want to ask questions. 2 states are really, really close to introducing this bill. We're having deep conversations, a lot more readying to do it. It's workable in, typically it's workable in any state, but only about 27 states at most would have a deep level of interest in this bill. I would encourage you to go look and see if your state received any grant money from the federal government in order to solve the orphaned oil well problem in America. Lower left-hand corner is a map, shows you where all the orphaned oil wells are. Ignore Canada, that's kind of a misnomer. The language they use is different up there. But if you kind of zoom in, and I'll send all this stuff to you guys, and I can send you the link to where it shows all the grant money. That if your state gets grant money, you should have a level of interest in trying to pursue this project. We also did an op-ed in this in Real Clear Energy about potential for orphan wells, the orphan well problem to be solved by Bitcoin mining. Some stuff in the press, Biden administration money. I think that link, this one right here, the Biden admin 1.15, I think that actually has the link to show you where the grant money is going to, which is great because you can tap into grant money and also attract Bitcoin mining to your state at the same time. You can also read about methane emissions and just the very negative impact that they have on warming. There's also other serious problems that are caused by unmitigated methane, like groundwater contamination, which is a massive problem in states like Texas and Oklahoma. The third bill here is the Bitcoin Mining Council Act. I kind of heard someone say something earlier. I think it was Dan Spoler, or maybe it was Dan, someone from your team, Dan, mentioning that how important it was to have your initiative there and to have your council put together as a way to kind of mitigate any sort of pushback and to kind of prove that you did the due diligence. Well, that's what this bill is. It's essentially created to give your state the opportunity to study Bitcoin mining, which we think is a really important thing for you to do, so you can understand all the potential benefits that it has to offer. We at Satoshi Action Fund say that Bitcoin mining has 5 key positive benefits that it can provide states, which is high-paying local jobs, local investment, grid stability, environmental cleanup, and enhancing renewables. Again, if you want to go into detail on any of those, if you haven't heard any of those before, or you've only heard some of them, happy to jump on a call with you at a future date to go over them in detail. But this is pretty self-explanatory. You create a Bitcoin mining council, you study Bitcoin mining, and you determine what your state wants to do with that information. The progress of this bill, language is finalized. Economic development departments really like this one. It really helps to kind of set the tone for what they want to do to attract Bitcoin mining. We've been in contact with quite a few economic development departments. We have a full presentation. This is some slides from the one that we did in New Hampshire when we presented to the governor's crypto commission there inside the economic development department. And I am 100% happy to come present to any of your economic development departments, as well as any group of state policymakers, regulators that any of you want to put together. If you want to do a one-on-one call with me, this is all I do all day, is I just try to craft really, really great pro Bitcoin mining policy that helps states safely, responsibly, and sustainably attract Bitcoin mining. And so I'm really happy to do a presentation for just even a single person on this call if you'd like me to. But that's the progress of that as well. And then the last one here is our Protection for Mining Act. This is essentially like the anti-New York bill. Love you guys in New York, by the way. I've been trying to do some stuff. I don't know if there's some New York people on the call. I'm sorry for what you're doing to Bitcoin mining. Hopefully we can go the other direction on it soon. But a lot of states don't want to go that direction. They want to go the opposite direction. And they want to show that they're their open door policy, they're ready to do business. And that it also kind of helps, if you do have some Bitcoin mining in your state, helps to kind of protect it from getting attacked by utilities or public utility commissions. We are also very interested in public utility commissions as a final comment there. So we do model policy, but we're starting to begin a lot of engagement on the PUC side of things, which is going to be a big part of the conversation moving forward. This bill, we have just finalized the language, so we don't have a lot of progress when it comes to getting it introduced or having the conversations. So we're just starting to have the conversations, but it's relatively workable in all 50 states. So that's pretty much it. We have drafts ready for each of you on all of these, the microgrid policy, the orphan well policy, mining protection, and the mining council. In our opinion, the easiest or easier policy to pass is probably going to be a mining council. That is because the things that people mentioned earlier about trying to make sure you're protected against backlash, do your due diligence. In case there is some sort of public uproar, you can show that you didn't just rush into this thing. We think, regardless of your ambition level, that every state should probably build a mining council. We believe that if you're able to establish a mining council in your state, and you are a big part of doing that, typically that does, in most situations, give you access to the selection process of who's going to be a part of that, or you'll have some influence, right? Like this happened in the Crypto Commission in New Hampshire. They were putting it together, and I knew the guy that was doing it and was lucky to eventually get selected. I didn't even actually submit myself, right? So just to be clear, but they ended up asking me to be a part of it. And so that could be something that happens in your state, or it can just help you also, find the right people that are going to be valuable and add them to the commission, be a part of that selection process. If you want to be more ambitious, which some states are, New Hampshire is, some states on the call are, hopefully Dan Spoler will be doing some cool stuff in North Carolina here soon. Microgrid policy is a great way to jumpstart everything. Orphan wells, and also, mining protections as well. Mining protections is pretty easy and kind of easy to explain. Orphan wells, easy to explain. Microgrid policy is a little more complex, but I'm really happy to hop on a call and go into such detail of why it's an extremely valuable piece of policy to push at your state level. Let's see here. Is that my last slide? I think that's my last slide. Yeah. So we have drafts ready for you. We also have a one-pager on the benefits of Bitcoin mining. And at the end of this, I'm happy, if we have time, I don't know how much time we have left, happy to answer any questions anyone might have about everything that was covered here. And Ari, thank you very much for letting me be a part of the presentation. And I love, last comment, would love what all you guys are doing on the state level. We at Satoshi Action Fund, there's no way we could go and be in every state. It's very early stages for us. And so we're really looking to partner with a lot of the state level groups, especially the state level blockchain association groups, NC blockchain initiative type groups, Texas Blockchain Council. We were just in Ohio presenting there and doing some work with them. So very excited to meet those of you who I haven't and continue working with those of you who I am chatting with.
Awesome. Thank you, Dennis. And we'll have all of this material available for folks that want it afterwards. And definitely would love your materials and links to the articles and the one-pagers for sure. And yeah, questions or comments from folks?
I like all of the mining emojis in the chat.
Yes. Well, I guess then I have a quick question is, why is Bitcoin mining important to have in the first place? Like, why is Bitcoin mining, why does it make it competitive for the United States versus like other states, if we're like even looking at it from that standpoint, from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of key advantages to Bitcoin mining. And one of the biggest one is that you can monetize excess energy. So for instance, in California, there's quite a bit of excess energy, and happy to show you, should have probably put a chart in the presentation sometime. It's not in this one, but I'll definitely have it in one eventually. But, California curtails more solar energy than some small countries. So they create too much solar. And during the middle of the day when no one is using it, which is common, they basically curtail or shut off those operations. And so because of this, it does hurt the ROI on renewables. And renewables as a technology are getting better and better, and better at creating energy at a cheaper price. But at the end of the day, like, a lot of this electricity goes unused, and there's not enough batteries in the world to store all of the energy that's being curtailed by California on a daily basis. So what you can do is you can monetize excess energy, drive GDP, create more jobs. The other thing that Bitcoin mining can do is it can help stabilize and balance the grid. So aside from, monetizing that excess energy that's created by the solar and the wind, it can also perform demand and frequency response, which is critical for renewables and really just any grid. Because as we move away from thermal turbines is like anything that you create heat that makes steam that spins a turbine. Those are all considered thermal turbines. And as we try to move away from those, because almost all of them are done through fossil fuels. If you like nuclear, then it's, that's not a problem. So some people like nuclear, some people don't. But as we move away from that, we need more demand and frequency response, because there's no inertia in renewables. Inertia is created, obviously, object in motion stays in motion. Those thermal turbines, the steam that's spinning them, they can stay in motion for like steady state motion for at least 60 seconds, which means that they create the same amount of power. Like, there's no drop in electrical output for 60 seconds. And that's really important because the grid has to stay stable all the time, 24/7, 365. The power that you're using to watch me give this presentation on your laptop or your phone, if it's plugged in, was created literally like milliseconds ago, probably 100 miles or less from you. Wow. And that supply and demand has to be met at all times, constantly. It's the grid is the greatest creation, mechanical, what do they call it? The greatest, I think it's mechanical discovery or achievement in human history, because it's pretty incredible the way it operates. But it has to match at 60 hertz, because alternating current has to hit 60 hertz all the time. And if that goes down because there's not enough supply, the grid will start to fail. And what will happen is you'll start to see rolling brownouts and blackouts, which is exactly what's happening in California and other states. It's not because there's not enough power. It's because there's not enough power at the exact moment that people need it. And so that number drops. And what you can do instead of that is have, instead of that situation, is you have those rolling brownouts and rolling blackouts. But instead of doing that, you can also say, okay, customers out there, would you be willing to curtail your usage instead of making the utility like pick winners and losers? And so Bitcoin mining is the perfect customer to come in and curtail because it doesn't have a significant economic impact on the economics itself. And also you have to pay customers that curtail. FERC requires that. So that's one thing, but frequency response also kind of similar thing, but Bitcoin mining serves as the perfect frequency response customer as well.
Jamie of California says, any model legislation on carbon trading credit legislation in the space for bluer states? And she totally agrees regarding curtailment of renewables. It's a huge issue here in California. Demand response programs just got a huge boost in funding. I wonder if there's an opportunity there. Maybe you guys should chat.
Yeah. So just super quick there. We won't have model legislation on carbon trading or carbon legislation currently, but we do believe that all industries that produce methane, landfills, agriculture, orphaned oil wells, wastewater treatment facilities, they all produce methane, and Bitcoin mining can actually tackle all 4 of those industries. It can go across all sectors to reduce methane emissions, which does have a net improvement on warming, and that those actually do qualify for carbon credits, if that's what you're asking about. Yeah, so methane reduction in any form qualifies for carbon credits. There's actually a landfill operator in California that's doing their pilot project there, and they're about to start combusting landfill gas. So I'd love to share more about that story with you, Jamie, when we get a chance. And then lastly, it was, demand response is huge. Ask any grid operator and they need like way more demand response. They need super flexible load. Some of the ideas currently are like, people can turn their ACs down. Like the utilities will control ACs, or the utilities will control your EV charging. Steel plants, cement plants also are really good at doing demand response, but they don't do it nearly enough, and it hurts them economically when they curtail. Bitcoin mining is the only business, I like to say in the world, but don't quote me if there's like one or other one out there that's good at it, but it's the only business that like it doesn't hurt it economically at all, other than just missing out on the opportunity of mining Bitcoin. Whereas like a steel plant, when the steel cools down, they have to reheat it back up. So they've lost money, and then they have to spend more money to get it back up to temperature. So they don't like to curtail. But then it can also serve as like the investor of first resort, like a hospital. Hospitals come in and they like help fund new generation because they know the hospital is going to use a lot of power. Bitcoin mining can do that, but hospitals can't wind down or they'll kill people. So can be both of those things at the same time. It's relatively revolutionary in the energy space.
Interesting. Thank you, Dennis. Other questions or comments? Otherwise, next up we have open mics. So I'll be turning on all your mics, those that are left in the audience, so that we can have some conversations and give each other updates. More questions for Dennis? You'll see your mic's being turned on, so don't be shocked when it does happen. Slowly, it's a manual process.
Thanks,
Did I have
Dennis.
go ahead, Jeff.
Appreciated the rundown. Thank you. I happened to see a private viewing some time ago, so thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Great to see you again, or hear you again, Jeff.
Ari, did you, I'm sorry, I was on something else. Did you want me to speak?
No, I'm opening it up. So we have open mic session now. So you can ask last minute questions for Dennis of the Satoshi Action Fund on Bitcoin mining, or we'll move on to the next part, which is open mic, talking about any particular state updates that you want to share, like Barry would be of South Dakota, or talking about what's up next in 2023 for your particular state.
Well,
I can go real quick
Barry?
on this. Yep, I'll go real quick on this if you're good on that.
Sure.
So we have a summit coming up at the end of the month. We're focused, and why I was asking questions earlier about a custody bill, and hopefully we're hope to get that in front of the legislature next year. We've had good support from Senator Thune on the federal level, and then a lot of local support. We're partnering with Dakota State University, and we'll be meeting there. Benaya Capital, which is a crypto hedge fund that's here, has kind of also been our sponsor. And then we're working with the Crypto Valley Association in Switzerland on some potential insurance products, which is very exciting. So that is a quick update from us.
Awesome. Thank you, Barry, South Dakota. Brooke actually has a question in the chat for Dennis. Dennis, do you want to handle it inside the chat?
I can say it really quickly. Basically, there is no specific global data or global hash rate data. There's just like the Bitcoin Mining Council, which is ran by Sailor, is the only group that really tracks it. I think like somewhat accurately, but I think it needs to be audited personally.
Yep.
I think Cambridge did a study too, but it's really hard to figure this stuff out because it's so decentralized and it's kind of like self-reporting at this point.
Don't trust, verify. Good question, Brooke. Jeff, I think you were started talking. Do you want to give an update?
Well, yeah, I can talk a little bit about it, but the big thing that's going on here in Oregon right now is the surprise of who's leading the gubernatorial race. It's been thought for a long time that Oregon was a perfectly blue state, would never swing Republican. Meanwhile, we've got a three-way race for governor, and there's a Democrat, a former Democrat who claims to be an independent, and a Republican. And right now, the Republican is leading the Democrat by almost 10 points.
Wow.
That would be a major upset for the Democratic Party nationally.
Yes, in the Pacific Northwest, that'll be a big change.
Yep, it would.
Interesting.
It's wild to watch that, Jeff, like play out. I'm from Oregon also, for those of you that don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it is fascinating to watch and to see how the National Democratic Party is reacting, because they did not expect to have to plow any money into the state of Oregon, and they're plowing a lot of money coming in here. I'd like to comment about, have I been to Bend? Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you look at the state from a county perspective, there's really only 3 counties that would be classified as blue. However, because of the nature of the political system, mathematically, we lean blue, but are really more of a purple state.
I was playing with the permissions on the chat, so for anybody that wants to also come on video, just let me know and I'll also be able to put you on video too. Francis says, I didn't know about Oregon being blue. Have you visited? Oh, you answered that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, hi, that's me, Mike's on. Yeah, I lived in Portland for 2 years, and very liberal city, but man, you get outside that and holy Trump signs everywhere, and
It's different.
very different.
Hey, Ari, it's Greg in Virginia.
Hi, Greg.
Just awesome day. Thank you so much. This was such valuable information from the state, all the way to Dennis's presentation. I got a quick story, and then I'll kind of send it back over to you. But, kudos to Dan and Agnes. Here in Virginia, we've been working on a sandbox regulation, not from my efforts or from our council's efforts. It's kind of been in the works, but Dan and Agnes kind of sent us with some introductions, obviously through Mercatus, and then that led us to Libertas, which then led us to AFP and the Virginia Institute for Policy. And then we started figuring out who actually crafted the bills and who's lobbying for them. So we were able to get plugged in and really start to support from a grassroots perspective. But that was over a 2-3 month period. But we're excited. We have a universal sandbox, and again, thanks to Dan and Agnes for getting us in the right direction.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Greg of Virginia. Other states on? I think we're down to the last bit of states. Any other questions or comments? Open mic?
Well, my one big comment or question area is I don't know how the hell you do it. So thank you for all you do for the whole movement with the 3 or 4 things that you're working on. And thanks for including me. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for being engaged and a part of it. All right. It might be giving you time back. I don't want to hold you hostage here, though I might. Haha, no, I won't. If we were in person, we'd be, breaking up a beer or, a mocktail. But this year, not in person yet. But I hope today was really helpful for you. If you have any suggestions on ways we can partner or break down silos across organizations, states, county lines, whatever it is, please let me know. I will have all of the slide decks available eventually. I'm working on collecting them. I know some folks didn't necessarily want to share them, but we're going to work on getting the collateral from all the presenters and available for folks. This recording will be available for folks shortly too. It'll be, video processed by our sponsors at the WTIA. And so when that is ready, I'll make sure I share the link out to all the attendees and presenters, and anybody that missed it can also catch this valuable information. And then if anybody wants a deep dive on any of the topics that were proposed, I mean, even, any of the particular states, or if we want to talk about demand response, flexible load with Bitcoin mining, we can do any of those deep dives too. And then next up, I just want to make sure you have it on your calendars. November 17th and 18th is the Texas Blockchain Summit. November 17th and 18th. Those that are part of the states, we get a discount code. So if you're a state, definitely let us know and we'll make sure you get the discount code. We want to do a multi-state VIP event on November 17th. But right now I'm the main event planner for that. So it depends on how quickly I can get things together in the next week or so. So we'll see. That is where we're aiming for. And then we're going to be looking for those use cases around distributed ledger technology, looking for the fast tracking of implementing any proof of concepts or prototypes in government. We have several private funders that want to get these funded. And so if you have a great use case for your particular state using distributed ledger technology, definitely let me know. In the meantime, we'll be hitting you up to add your use cases to the use case catalog. And then the other thing, as you know, there are a lot of opinions and a lot of great, well-intentioned data running around, but we don't have enough actual data. And so as an industry, we need to be a lot more data informed and have a lot more surveys and statistics and information. And so one of the things that we are working on getting sponsored is the USBC Economic Impact Study of Digital Assets by state. We have a vendor that we work with, we being the royal we, the WTI, the largest technology industry association in the US, has worked with many times before. So, I think having this commissioned by the WTI also lends a lens of serious and maybe even neutrality to having such a study. And so if you're interested in helping us get sponsors for that or interested in participating in that, please let us know. And then I think that's it for my announcements. I really appreciate your time and interest and engagement today. If you have any questions or comments, definitely let myself know or any of the speakers. And let's see, that's 37 minutes of your day back.
I think Ari Dennis, I think, stand up for comment or question before we drop.
Sure, yes.
Yeah, do you mind if I just mention the dinner on the 18th that you'll be at?
That's right, November 18th. Go, Dennis.
I wasn't thinking about it until you mentioned the TBC thing, but here, I'll just show really quickly in case you guys can get a see this. But Satoshi Action Fund is doing a dinner in Austin, Texas on the 18th. It'll be during the conference, but like right as the conference is ending. So reception will start at 4:30, dinner 5:30, presentation, all that jazz. We have a bunch of great people who decided to be a part of it. We're adding more as we go. We've got Darren Feinstein, Lee Bratcher, RAU, Dan Held, Natalie Burnell, Nick Carter, Representative Amon, Perry Ann Boring, and a few others. But if you're interested in being a part of the event, so there'll be bar, it's gonna be Texas barbecue themed. If you're interested in being a part of the event, we're doing tables. So if you guys do want to get a table for your state together, we're doing those for $2,500 and it comes with 8 dinner tickets. You can split the cost of that among whoever you want to bring. And there are other sponsorship opportunities as well if you want to get more of your, if you want to get your state level organization some focus. But basically, we wanted to give more of a highlight to state level folks. So also, if you do bring like a state level person, policymaker or regulator that you feel like has been like a champion for Bitcoin, Bitcoin mining, like we're doing an awards ceremony. So we'd be happy to consider them as someone to receive an award. That's pretty much it. Reach out to me, Dennis@satoshiaction.io if you want to learn more about it.
Awesome. Thanks, Dennis, for jumping in on that. November 17th, 18th, we're trying to get as many states there as possible. So Texas is offering a discount code for states. And then we think it's a last chance to get the multi-states together in person before the end of the year. And then we'll come together again in 2023 at various events as we organize. All right, well, 35 minutes of your day back. Thank you everyone for your engagement and your attention and your support. And I look forward to connecting with you all soon. If you want to reach out to any of the attendees or be connected, just let me know. Happy to connect you. And thank you.